Chapter 472. Go to watch net. On the 8th day of the 12th lunar month, Dongwu City. Go to watch net. The three foreigners, Chris, John, and Alba, followed Li Yunyang's footsteps all the way to Dongwu City. They knew that the Taoist assembly would not begin until the next day, so they first found a hotel to stay in and had a good night's sleep. On the 8th day of the 12th lunar month, the three of them left early, walked along the ancient canal of Dongwu City, and walked to the Zenshikyo Pier. Along the way, the three of them kept taking pictures with their cameras and mobile phones in their hands, marveling at the beautiful scenery of this ancient city that had existed for thousands of years. While taking pictures with her mobile phone, Alba sighed sincerely. It's so beautiful. This city is really great. I didn't expect that there would be such a beautiful city in China. John also nodded and praised. I've been to Tian'an City before. In my impression, Tian'an City is a developed modern city. The process of urbanization is very fast, but it feels no different from the cities in our country. As long as the people inside are Americans, you can't tell whether it's a city in China or an American city. But Dongwu City is different. This city has a strong Oriental flavor, which makes me feel like I've returned to ancient China. Since Chris had been teased by her grandmother when she returned to the United States last time, she had put in a lot of hard work and began to study all aspects of China's culture, history, and customs. She smiled slightly and acted as a temporary tour guide. She said with a smile, Dongwu City is full of treasures and has an outstanding people. Since 514 AD, King Fuchai of Wu has built this city here. Since then, this city has been a famous cultural, economic, and political city of this country. Three foreigners with deep eyes and high noses walked slowly along the willow embankment of the moat of Dongwu City. John and Alba listened carefully as Chris introduced this famous historical city in China. Chris had an outstanding appearance and a tall figure. She walked along the embankment and talked with assurance, attracting the attention of many people. She said in a clear voice, Dongwu City has been very prosperous and developed since ancient times, so it is known as a paradise on earth. Also, because Dongwu City has always been famous for its beautiful scenery and elegant gardens, it has the reputation of being the best garden in the world and the best garden in Dongwu City. Chris pointed to the bridge that spanned the moat, as well as the arch bridges that could be seen everywhere on the side of the road, and said, in the 13th century, Marco Polo came here. Because he saw the small bridges and flowing water here, he praised Dongwu City as the Venice of the East in his travels. Alba smiled and exclaimed, I've been to Venice. It's also a very beautiful city. The style there is completely different from here, but it's hard to tell which one is better. The three of them chatted and laughed as they walked along the moat for a while. After walking for about 2 kilometers, they finally arrived near the pier of Xinshe Bridge. As soon as they arrived, the three of them saw that the pier was surrounded by all kinds of luxury clubs and entertainment venues. It didn't look like a place where cultivators would hold a party at all. Alba looked around and couldn't help but ask curiously, is the so-called Taoist assembly being held here? Is it being held in a dance bar? Hardedef also looked left and right in confusion. He couldn't help but ask curiously, didn't that man say it was on an oil tanker last time? How can there be a luxury cruise ship here? Chris couldn't help but smile bitterly. Hardedef, don't joke around. Look carefully. This is a moat. Where can a luxury cruise ship come from? Do you think an oil tanker like the Titanic can enter this kind of moat? Oh, please, the Titanic can block this river. Hardedef glanced around and suddenly saw a medium-sized cruise ship moored near the pier of Xinshe Bridge. The cruise ship was divided into 2 floors. There was a large balcony on the upper floor, which was obviously for tourists to enjoy the scenery by the river. Below, it was a closed cabin that could accommodate about 300 or 400 people. Hardedef pointed at the oil tanker and asked curiously, Hey, is this the one? Chris and Alba looked at it together and nodded in unison. It's possible. Let's go and ask. The three of them quickly stepped forward. Just as they were about to pass through the pier, they suddenly saw 2 people dressed like tourists approach them. One was fat, and the other was thin. The 2 of them glanced up and down at them, then blocked their way. Seeing this, Chris immediately said in fluent Chinese, "Hello. May I ask if the Taoist assembly is being held here?" The two of them were stunned. They looked at each other and asked in surprise at the same time, "Who are you? How do you know about the Taoist assembly?" Hardadef quickly leaned over and said cheekily, "We are." Chris was afraid that he would act first and report later, so she quickly stamped on his foot with the heel of her high heels. Hardadef felt the pain, and his facial features twisted together. Chris pulled Hardadef, who wanted to cry but had no tears, behind her and said with a smile, "I'm Chris, an intern reporter from the Philadelphia Daily, and these two are my colleagues. We heard that today is the day of the ancient Taoist Assembly of China, so we wanted to interview you. I wonder." Before she could finish her words, the two of them said impatiently, "What Taoist assembly? I don't know. Let's go. This place is closed today. Didn't you see the sign?" As he spoke, he pointed to the closed sign hanging at the ticket office next to him. Chris was stunned and was about to say something, but the two of them waved their arms and drove them out. Just then, a luxurious Mercedes-Benz limousine stopped beside the road at the pier, and a few men and women in suits and leather shoes got out of the car. As soon as the two of them saw these people, they were immediately stunned. They went up to them with smiles on their faces, cupped their hands, and said, "May I ask which sect you are from?" The leader was a man with a square face and sword-like eyebrows. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm Du Fei from the Chuanjian Dragon sect." The two people who were welcoming the guests smiled and cupped their hands. It turns out to be Jinren Du, the jade-faced golden monkey. "It's an honor to meet you." Du Fei then introduced a short man next to him and said, "This is my youngest shitty, Yu Sheng, who is known as the Three-Eyed Erlang." The fatter of the two exclaimed and said with a solemn face, "It turns out that Jinren Three-Eyed has arrived. Sorry for my disrespect." Yu Sheng was not tall, but he was extremely arrogant. He looked at the two of them proudly, snorted, and then turned his nostrils to the sky, no longer looking at them. The two of them seemed to know Yu Sheng's temper, so they didn't care about it and just smiled. Du Fei then introduced a woman in a professional suit beside him. He smiled and said, "This is my shimmy, Wei Qing." Wei Qing had light makeup on her face. She smiled sweetly and said, "I'm not a famous cultivator. I'm just here to join in the fun with Shi Xiang. I don't have a nickname. You can just call me Wei Qing." The two of them saw that Wei Qing was young and beautiful, had a pleasant smile, and was approachable. She was not as arrogant as Yu Sheng. They both laughed and said, "Well said, well said." Wei Qing approached the two of them and asked curiously, "Hey, are all the other sects here?" The thinner of the two said with a smile, "The Yinyang sect of Mount Wuhua has arrived, and so has the Qingwei sect. There are also people from the Donghua sect, the Donghai sect, the Penglai sect, the Jinshan sect, the Loguan Taoist sect, the Qingshui sect, and other sections." Hearing this, Yu Sheng snorted coldly and sneered in a low voice, "They're all a group of nobodies." The two of them glanced at Yu Sheng and felt angry in their hearts. It turns out that only the Chuanjian Dragon sect is a big sect in the world, and only Yu Sheng are famous cultivators. Are the others not worth mentioning? Wei Qing, who was standing to one side, saw that the atmosphere was awkward. She rolled her eyes and quickly tried to smooth things over. She said with a smile, "Oh, there are so many people here. It's so lively. I thought we arrived early. I wonder if Jinren Li has arrived?" The two people in charge of welcoming the guests looked at each other in confusion. "Jinren Li? Which Jinren Li? Which sect is he from?" At this time, Yu Sheng couldn't help snorting coldly again. Who in the world is surnamed Li worthy of being called Jinren Li? The two people in charge of welcoming the guests were both inner disciples of the Gazao sect of external alchemy. Their strength was extraordinary, so they had been sent to welcome the guests. Otherwise, if the cultivators of other sects saw them, they would think to themselves, "It turns out that the cultivators of the Gazao sect are so weak." However, the two of them had not expected that even with their cultivation quotients, not only were they not qualified in Yu Sheng's eyes, but also all the cultivators surnamed Li in the world. His arrogance was boundless. The most annoying thing was that both of them had the surname Li. This sentence was like a slap to the faces of both of them. The fatter one suppressed his anger and said, I haven't asked Jinren yet. Who in the world is surnamed Li worthy of being called Jinren Li? Wei Qing saw that the two of them looked unfriendly and were about to lose their temper. She quickly said with a smile, Oh, of course it's Li Yundong. It's my fault for not asking clearly. It's Li Yundong. When the two people of the Gazao sect of external alchemy heard this, their expressions immediately changed. The fatter one asked seriously, Is it Li Yundong, the one who took over as the leader of the Fox Zen school from Mount Tianlong? The thinner one asked, Is it Li Yundong who made a scene on Mount Gazao of our ancestral court? When Wei Qing heard this, she complained in her heart, Oh no, how could I forget that Li Yundong has a grudge against the Gazao sect? You're really touching on my sore spot. Wei Qing laughed dryly and said, It seems to be this Li Yundong. Ah, haha. The two of them snorted coldly. The fatter one sneered and said, It turns out to be Jinren Li. I was wondering who it was that caught Jinren Yu's attention. I heard that Jinren Yu and Jinren Li seemed to have had a fight last time and suffered a small loss, right? No wonder he can't forget Jinren Li. The thinner one also sneered and said, It's fine if he doesn't come. If he does, we have to let him have a good taste of the power of our external alchemy. Otherwise, will he really think that there is no one in our Gazao sect? Yu Sheng glanced at the two of them and sneered secretly. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a clear voice coming from afar. It had a strong Sichuan accent and was laughing. Who was so bold as to look down on the Gazao sect of external alchemy? Don't you know that a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake? They looked in the direction of the voice and saw three young men in Taoist robes walking over slowly. The young man in the lead was tall, handsome, and had an extraordinary temperament. He carried a long sword wrapped in gray cloth on his back, looking inconspicuous. The fatter one cupped one hand in the other before his chest and asked, May I ask who you are? The young man in the lead made a palm with one hand, bowed, and said with a smile, I'm Zhang Tsuni from the Qingyang Palace in Chengdu, Sichuan. When everyone heard this, they were shocked. They all looked at Zhang Tsuni and thought, Is this the future leader of the Qingqing sect, Zhang Tsuni, who had said that he would win first place before the Taoist assembly? They looked Zhang Tsuni up and down, only to see that he was full of spirit and his eyes were bright. He stood where he was and was really tall. He did have the demeanor of a master of a famous sect and could be called a first-class master of the younger generation in the cultivation world. However, there were many sects and masters in the Taoist assembly. Zhang Tsuni dared to boast that he would win first place. There was no doubt that he relied on the powerful magical weapon of the Qingqing sect, the Sanhuang sword. Everyone's eyes finally fell on the inconspicuous 3-feet-long sword wrapped in gray cloth on Zhang Tsuni's back. They thought to themselves, Is this the famous Sanhuang sword, known as the top magical weapon in the world?
C.
Chapter 473. Go to watch net. The two ushers of the Gazao sect looked at the Sanhuang sword behind Zhang Tsuni, smiled at the same time, cupped their hands, and said, It turns out that you are from the Qingqing sect. Please come in, please come in. Zhang Tsuni also cupped his hands and smiled. He looked at Du Fei and the others and asked curiously, This is? Without waiting for an introduction, Du Fei smiled and saluted with one hand, Chuanjin Dragon Sect, Du Fei. Wei Qing also smiled and bowed. I'm Wei Qing. Zhang Tsuni smiled and returned the salute. His eyes finally fell on Yu Sheng. When his eyes met Yu Sheng's, his body immediately shook slightly. He frowned subconsciously, narrowed his eyes, and said, Then this must be the three-eyed Jinren Yu Sheng. Yu Sheng snorted, put his hands behind his back, and said lightly, Yes. Zhang Tsuni saw that Yu Sheng was arrogant. He was also a proud person. How could he see anyone more arrogant than him? He snorted and said, I heard that Jinren Yu fought with Jinren Li before and almost harmed mortals. I just don't know who won and who lost. Yu Sheng frowned and looked at Wei Qing with displeasure. It seemed that he was very dissatisfied that Wei Qing had spread the news about this matter to the entire cultivation world. Watch net. 7th KOM. When Wei Qing saw Yu Sheng glaring at her, she stuck out her tongue guiltily. Just as she was about to say a few words for Yu Sheng, she heard Zhang Tsuni laugh and say, "In fact, it doesn't matter who wins or loses. The important thing is not to be discovered by the secular mortals. Otherwise, wouldn't we cultivators have wasted our time in cultivating our magical powers?" As he said this, Zhang Tsuni smiled at Du Fei and said, "Jinren Du, you are the eldest senior brother. You should supervise your junior brothers in their practice. Otherwise, if their kung fu is not good enough, they will harm others and themselves." This sentence made the people of the Qiuanjin dragon sect so angry that they almost lost their temper on the spot. Yu Sheng even opened his eyes wide and stared at Zhang Tsuni, clenching his fists tightly. When the fat usher of the Gazao sect saw this, he immediately tried to smooth things over and said, "Oh, we are all fellow Taoists. If there are any grievances, let's talk about it on the boat. How can we get angry here? Jinren Du, Jinren Zhang, Jinren Yu, please come in." The thinner one also advised, That's right. 2,000 years ago, we were all from the same source. Why do we have to argue?" Yu Sheng was young and aggressive. He sneered and said, "Who has the same origin as them? Are you even worthy?" Zhang Tsuni sneered, "Yes, of course you don't deserve it." Yu Sheng's eyes widened, and he was about to lose his temper. Wei Qing, who was standing to one side, had sharp eyes and saw several people in Taoist robes walking over from a distance. She quickly changed the topic and said, "Hey, look, another fellow Taoist is coming. Hey, why are they wearing Taoist robes?" Du Fei, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but say curiously, "Yes, it's been many years since I've seen someone wearing Taoist robes attend the Taoist assembly." The Taoist assembly had been held for more than 1,300 years since the time of Emperor Xuanzong of Tang. In the beginning, the Taoist assembly was a grand gathering of Taoist cultivators in the world. Those who were not from the Taoist sects could not participate, so naturally, all the participants were Taoists wearing Taoist robes. However, with the changes of the times, in order to adapt to the development of the dynasty, the Taoist sects resumed the Taoist assembly. In order to avoid the eyes and ears of the world, and even more so to avoid the taboo of the current government, many cultivators changed to ordinary people's casual clothes. Gradually, this formed a tacit rule of the Taoist assembly. But today, more than a dozen Taoist cultivators in Taoist robes had suddenly come all the way. How could they not be surprised? Even Zhang Tsuni and Yu Sheng, who had been angry at the beginning, couldn't help but be stunned and wonder in their hearts. But when these people got closer, they found that the person in the lead had a dignified appearance with a cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. It was Zhang Ling, the elder sister of Taoist Zhang, the leader of the Jingyi school. Only then did they know that this group of people in Taoist robes were actually fellow Taoists of the Jingyi school. Although the Gazao sect and the Jingyi school had done a lot of dirty things in private, they were still very dignified on the surface. The two Taoists in charge of welcoming the guests immediately went up to greet them. The fatter one saluted with one hand and said, "It turns out that the fellow members of the Jingyi school have come. Please come in." Zhang Ling was followed by more than a dozen people, and the one who followed her the closest was her disciple, Zhou Ping. Next to Zhou Ping stood the dignified Wang Lingfei and a well-behaved little girl, who was also wearing a Taoist robe. It was the little shimmy who had been monitoring Li Yunyang's family with her before. Zhang Ling didn't even look at the two of them, nor did she look at the people of the Qiuanjin dragon sect and the Qingqing sect. She raised her head and walked inside. Since they took the lead, the others naturally followed suit. Only the little shimmy looked at Du Fei, Yu Sheng, Zhang Tsuni, and the others curiously. Then she stuck out her tongue and quickly followed them. The behavior of the people of the Jingyi school made the people who had wanted to be polite to the people of the Jingyi school feel embarrassed. The people of the Gazao sect were angry in their hearts. Good heavens, I thought Yu Sheng was arrogant enough, but I didn't expect that Zhang Tsuni from Chengdu, Sichuan, would be even more arrogant than Yu Sheng. Now, it turns out that the most arrogant one is yet to come. The Jingyi school simply ignores everyone. Are they so arrogant just because their sect is powerful? Yu Sheng and Zhang Xuni also stared at the Taoist priests of the Jingyi school with twinkling eyes. Just as they were about to sneer and ridicule them, another Taoist priest in a Taoist robe suddenly followed them. Although he was in a hurry, this Taoist priest had delicate features, a handsome face, and eyes like stars. At first glance, they could tell that he was a great young master. They took a closer look and saw that the Taoist priest was wearing a Taoist robe with gold rims and a black and white 8 trigrams pattern on his chest. Du Fei took a look and saw that this person was Zhang Tianhe, the Yuyang Jinren whom he had met once on Mount Tianlong. Zhang Tianhe? Has his injury healed? Du Fei was slightly stunned. He took the initiative to step forward and salute. Jinren Zhang, how have you been? Zhang Tianhe stopped with a smile and said, It turns out to be Jinren Du, nice to meet you. Du Fei smiled and said, Why is Jinren Zhang walking at the back? Zhang Xuni, who was standing to one side, was very unhappy after being treated coldly by Zhang Ling and the others. At this time, he vented all his anger on Zhang Tianhe. He sneered and said, Is it because Jinren Zhang's injury hasn't healed after the battle on Mount Tianlong? The battle on Mount Tianlong had been regarded by Zhang Tianhe as a great shame. When he heard Zhang Xuni mention it, his face suddenly changed slightly. He saluted with one hand and said, May I ask who this fellow Taoist is? Zhang Xuni snorted and said, Zhang Xuni of the Qingyang Palace in Chengdu. Zhang Tianhe smiled slightly and retorted sarcastically, It turns out to be Zhang Xuni, the fellow Taoist who was sent down the mountain by Li Yundong at the foot of Mount Tianlong. I'm sorry. Zhang Xuni had fought with Li Yundong in private and suffered a loss. He had always thought that it was a secret and no one knew about it, but he hadn't expected that it would be pointed out by Zhang Tianhe. Zhang Xuni's face changed, and he was shocked. How did he know? Could it be that Li Yundong has spread it everywhere? Humph, it must be so. This despicable man. I must teach him a lesson today. As the saying goes, people strive for dignity, while Buddhas strive for incense. Although cultivators pay attention to pure hearts and few desires and are indifferent to fame and fortune, they regard their reputation as more important than anything else. Moreover, at this time, it was the beginning of the Taoist assembly. If he admitted this matter, wouldn't he be admitting that he was inferior to Li Yundong? How could Zhang Xuni, who had always thought highly of himself, be willing to do such a thing? Zhang Xuni sneered and said, There's no such thing. I really don't know what nonsense you're talking about. Yu Sheng, who had been ridiculed by Zhang Xuni before, also took the opportunity to add insult to injury. He sneered sinisterly, If you don't want people to know, don't do it. What? Zhang Xuni, haven't you been educated? Oh, I really don't know why your father let you come out at ease. Isn't he afraid that you'll make a fool of yourself? Zhang Xuni suddenly became furious and glared at Yu Sheng. Yu Sheng did not show any weakness, and his eyes were as sharp as knives. Zhang Tianhe, who was standing to one side, saw the two of them staring at each other like fighting cocks. He laughed and said, Brothers of the Tao, please go ahead. I'll leave now. Zhang Xuni and Yu Sheng immediately turned their heads and said in unison, Don't go. Zhang Tianhe turned his head and sneered. What? Do you want me to stay? Zhang Xuni sneered and said, I just want to test your kung fu skills. The Taoist of the Gazao sect, Du Fei, and the others were stunned. The fatter Taoist of the Gazao sect whispered, Shi Xiang, what should we do? It seems that the situation is getting more and more difficult. The thinner Taoist also whispered, Forget it, let's watch them fight. On the other side, Wei Qing of the Qiuanjin dragon sect saw that the three of them were about to fight, so she tried to persuade them. Well, stop talking. The three of you have all suffered at Li Yundong's hands. As the saying goes, every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. When Li Yundong comes, it won't be too late for you to fight. When Zhang Xuni, Yu Sheng, and Zhang Tianhe heard this, they were stunned at the same time. They immediately felt the same hatred for the enemy. Zhang Xuni sneered and said, Does Li Yundong dare to come? Yu Sheng also said coldly, If he dares to come, I will definitely make him lose convincingly this time. Zhang Tianhe was silent, and a sharp light suddenly flashed in his eyes. Since he had been defeated by Li Yundong last time, he had gone back to cultivate in seclusion. His cultivation and kung fu were no longer the same as before. He had been waiting for the day to wash away his shame. Chris, John, and Alba, who were watching all this from a distance, also stared at the Taoists in different clothes. Alba couldn't help asking, "Chris, what's going on? Who are these people in robes? Are they monks?" Chris didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Don't joke around. They are Taoist priests, cultivators of Taoism. Buddhism came from India, and Taoism is a native religion of China." Only then did Alba understand. "Oh, I see. But why are some of them dressed like this and others like that?" John shrugged his shoulders and said, "This is a free country. At least, we can wear clothes freely, can't we?" Alba rolled her eyes at him. "Thank you for your explanation. I'm very satisfied with it. So, Mr. Liberal, can you tell me how we can get in and watch this Taoist assembly? Are we going to watch it from the shore later?" John smiled bitterly and said, "We can't watch it from the shore. You know, this cruise ship can move." Alba turned to look at Chris. "Chris, hurry up and think of a way." Chris spread out her hands. "What can I do? We are not Taoist priests." Alba couldn't help shouting, "We came all the way here from the United States. Are we going to be stumped?" While the three foreigners were staring at each other, at their wits' end, Chris suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Yundong, is that the cruise ship? Why is the Taoist assembly being held here? It's so strange." Chris turned her head and saw a beautiful and lovely girl snuggling up to a handsome man, talking with a sweet smile. Although they were far away, Chris still recognized at a glance that the girl with a beautiful voice like a silver bell was Su Chan, and the man next to her was Li Yundong. Even though Chris was from a big family and had an extremely strict upbringing, she couldn't help but pull John's arm excitedly. "John, look, who is this?" At first, John looked over listlessly, but when he saw who it was, his eyes suddenly widened, and he jumped up excitedly. He laughed and said, "It's Master. Master is here." Alba was stunned. "Lose? What do you mean lose? Is it Li Yundong you were talking about? Is that B** start here? Where is he? I want to scold him to death." In the distance, Hardadef shouted excitedly, attracting many passers-by to look at him. Du Fei and the others also looked at them. Du Fei smiled bitterly and couldn't help but glare at his little junior sister. "Speak of the devil, and the devil comes." Wei Qing, you really have a jinx." Wei Qing didn't seem to see Du Fei's gaze. She also saw Li Yundong at a glance and shouted excitedly, "Look, Zhenrenli is here." Zhang Tsuni, Yu Sheng, and Zhang Tianhe immediately looked at Li Yundong at the same time. It was as if Mars had collided with Earth, and a strong Jinqi surged around them. The wind was fierce and murderous, as if they were going to fight in the next second. Vote for recommendation previous page. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Vixen at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Vixen at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 474. Go to WatchNet. Seeing that a big fight was about to break out before the Taoist assembly had even begun, the two Taoist ushers of the Gazao sect were so anxious that they were sweating profusely. They tried to persuade one of them, but failed to persuade the other. It was really like holding the gourd down and the ladle up. WatchNet. 7th K.O.M. What's more, Wei Qing, who was eager to see the world in chaos, was fanning the flames from time to time. Especially when she saw Li Yundong, her eyes lit up, and her excited expression seemed to be saying, "Fight, fight, hurry up and fight. Let's see who's more powerful." Du Fei had been cultivating in the secular world for a long time. As the eldest Shixiang of the Qiuanzhen dragon sect, he was also relatively stable. He thought with a headache, isn't this little sister too strange? Why was he trying to mediate the fight, and then causing trouble? The fat Taoist usher of the Gazao sect said with a wry smile, Dear Jinren, today is a big day in our cultivation world, which happens once every 4 years. It's not a big deal to fight here, but it's a big deal to make the government unhappy. Even if we win, we'll be covered in blood. What glory is there to celebrate? The thinner Taoist also hurriedly persuaded, if you have any grudges, can't you solve them at the Taoist assembly later? Zhang Tianhe was the first to withdraw his gaze. He smiled slightly and said, you two are right. We'll see what happens at the Taoist assembly later. After saying that, he walked towards the cruise ship at the dock. Zhang Xuni and Yuxin looked at each other and boarded the cruise ship one after another. Only Du Fei and Wei Qing had a good relationship with Li Yundong, so they stayed and watched him approach. Wei Qing watched as Li Yundong approached with a group of little foxes from the Fox Sun School, surrounded by Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and the others. She couldn't help but laugh and say, it's said that Jinren Li is a romantic saint. Now it seems that it's true. He really deserves his reputation. But it's no wonder. This Li Jinren is modest, gentle, and humorous. He's also handsome, and his cultivation and kung fu are also very good. No wonder so many people like him. When a woman looks at a man and when a man looks at a man, the angle is completely different. Du Fei looks at Li Yundong's bearing and spirit. It had been more than a month since they had last parted. Li Yundong's appearance at this time obviously meant that he had subdued the burning thumb pot. Du Fei knew how difficult it was to subdue the burning thumb pot, so he had not used it for a long time. Du Fei looked at Li Yundong carefully and couldn't help but say to Wei Qing, Shimmy, do you think there's anything different about Li Yundong? Wei Qing sized him up and nodded with a smile. Yes. Du Fei couldn't help but smile and nod. Yes, I noticed it too. What do you think is different? Wei Qing smiled and said, you've become even more handsome. You've become more mature. Du Fei was so angry that he laughed. Why do you only pay attention to this? Wei Qing looked at him in confusion. Then what should I pay attention to? Du Fei shook his head and helplessly said, Master is kind enough to let you enter the secular world to cultivate and gain experience. But you're reading fashion magazines all day, chasing this star today and that star tomorrow. What's the use of just paying attention to people's appearance? We cultivators cultivate on the inside, not the outside. Wei Qing was not convinced and retorted, I've paid attention to his inner qualities. Du Fei glared at her. Still talking back. You haven't paid attention to anything. Wei Qing glared back without showing any weakness. I feel that he has matured. Isn't maturity coming from the inside? Du Fei was so angry that he laughed. Just as he was about to teach his little shimmy a lesson, he saw that Li Yundong and the others had already walked over. Li Yundong cupped his hands with a smile and said, Jinren Du, we meet again. Du Fei had no choice but to glare at Wei Qing, indicating that he would let her go for the time being. He turned his face, laughed, and cupped his hands. Jinren Li, I haven't seen you for half a month. Your cultivation has become more and more refined. Just now, when you came from afar, you already had the bearing of a master. Congratulations. Li Yundong smiled modestly and said, Not at all. I have to thank you for your help, Jinren Du. Du Fei laughed and said, Don't mention it. We're all in the same boat. There's no need to be so polite. While Li Yundong and Du Fei were chatting, a shout suddenly came from not far away. A foreign man with a strange accent shouted, Master! Master! Li Yundong was slightly stunned when he heard the voice. He only felt that it was a little familiar, but he couldn't remember who it was for a moment. When he turned his head to look, he was shocked. Li Yundong saw Hardadef, Chris, and a tall foreign girl with a South American style running over. He asked curiously, Hardadef? Chris? Why are you here? Is there another exchange student in the school this year? Hardadef looked excited. He said loudly in a non-standard Chinese language, Master, you said that if I could speak Chinese, you would accept me as your disciple. Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. Oh no, I just said it casually at that time, but this guy is so stupid that he took it seriously. Li Yundong didn't answer him. He turned to look at Chris and asked, Chris, why are you here? Chris lifted her wavy blonde hair and said with a smile in a standard Chinese language, "I'm also here to be your disciple." Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, "Didn't I tell you last time that my kung fu is only passed on to men and not to women?" Chris seemed to have expected that Li Yundong would say this. She pointed at Hardadef and said, "Then you should accept him, because you promised him that as long as he could speak Chinese, you would accept him as your disciple." Chinese have a saying that goes, "A promise is worth 9 tripods." For your words, we came here from the distant United States. You should keep your promise. Hardadef, who was standing to one side, also puffed out his chest and sucked in his stomach, as if he were a Boy Scout waiting to be inspected by an officer. His face was full of nervousness and excitement. From time to time, he glanced at Li Yundong, and his hands, which were beside his trousers, kept sweating. From time to time, he grabbed his trousers and wiped them. Li Yundong smiled bitterly. He hadn't expected that Chris would actually block his words here, making it impossible for him to refute. He sighed and said, "Chris, if you want to learn kung fu, I can teach you." "No problem." Hardadef hurriedly shouted, "No. Master, I want to learn your superhuman kung fu, the kind that can send people flying with one punch and dodge bullets. If I wanted to learn kung fu, I could have learned it in the United States. Why did I come here?" Li Yundong shook his head. "That won't work, Hardadef." Hardadef was so anxious that he blurted out in English, "God, why not? Can I speak Chinese?" Alba, who was standing to one side, had been listening to them speak Chinese and was confused. At this time, she finally heard a sentence that she could understand. She immediately said to Li Yundong, "Hey, are you still living in the old era of the last century? Why are you so young and full of old ideas? Please, it's the 21st century now. Look around you. Your compatriots are so open-minded. They are no different from us Americans in many ways. Why are your ideas so old-fashioned? Why can't Hardadef be your disciple? Why can't Chris? Is it just because she's a woman? What's wrong with women? What can't women do?" Alba spoke hurriedly and quickly, like a light machine gun, firing off a lot of words. Li Yundong listened with his eyes wide open. After a while, he turned his head to look at Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin. Did anyone understand what she said? Zhou Qin's English was good, but after all, it was different from Native Americans. Even Americans with slow reactions might not be able to fully understand Alba's fast speech. She smiled bitterly and said, "I only understood 2 sentences." Ziyuan also shook her head and said with a smile, "I don't understand either." Su Chan blinked and asked, "She's just a barbarian. Why do you care about her?" Li Yundong smiled and tapped Su Chan's nose. "You're more xenophobic than I am." Chris said, "How about I translate it?" Before Li Yundong could speak, he saw Wei Qing giggling with her mouth covered. Li Yundong turned around and said to her with a smile, "Jinren Wei, do you understand?" Wei Qing quickly waved her hand. "I don't deserve to be called a Jinren. I understand a little. If you don't mind, I'll translate it for you." Li Yundong chuckled. "That's good. Hurry up and translate." Wei Qing smiled and translated Alba's words. Li Yundong listened carefully. After he finished, he said to Wei Qing, "I have a few words to say. Help me translate." Chris, who was standing to one side, said indignantly, "Why can't I translate?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Chris, I know you have a good understanding of Chinese culture, but that's only for Americans. You're still far from truly understanding Chinese culture. There are many things that your translation may not be as accurate as Jinren Wei's." Wei Qing made a face at Chris with a smile, and Chris turned her head angrily. Li Yundong said politely to Alba, "Beautiful American lady, thank you very much for your kind reminder. But if you have read the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, you should know the sentence. It goes like this: a fish can't escape from the abyss, and the sharp weapons of a country can't be shown to others." What does this mean? It means that the most important things of a country can never be shown to outsiders. If I wanted to see your country's confidential information, would your people let me see it? Wei Qing looked at Li Yundong with admiration and secretly gave him a thumbs up. She laughed and said in a low voice, "Good eloquence." Wei Qing smiled and translated Li Yundong's words. Then, she said to John sympathetically, "Don't think about it. Hurry back to the United States. We welcome your Taoism, but if you want to learn our cultivation skills, that's absolutely impossible." At this time, Li Yundong also laughed and said, "It's not impossible." Wei Qing and Du Fei were stunned at the same time. Du Fei blurted out, "Jinren Li, you can't do that. In the past 2,000 years, no one in our cultivation world has ever dared to accept a barbarian as a disciple. If you accept them, you will become the target of the cultivation world." Li Yundong smiled and waved his hand, saying disapprovingly, "Jinren Du, this is a little inappropriate. In my opinion, Wang Jinyuan, the master of the Gazao sect, is a mixed-race person." The fat Taoist usher of the Gazao sect, who had been silent all this time, said unhappily, "Jinren Li, our sect master only looks like him. He is from Xinjiang, so he looks like a foreigner." Li Yundong laughed and said, "That's right. The people of Xinjiang are also our children. But have you ever thought about what happened hundreds or even thousands of years ago? Before the Xinjiang people became part of our Chinese territory, were they the so-called barbarians that we speak of?" Li Yundong's words stunned everyone, and they all looked thoughtful. Li Yundong continued, "Moreover, our country has always regarded itself as the Central Kingdom. For thousands of years, countless foreign nationalities, which we call barbarians, invaded the Central Plains. In the end, they were all assimilated and became a part of the Chinese nation. In the end, we all recognize them as part of the Chinese nation. What does this mean? It means one thing. As long as they speak the Chinese language, learn Chinese culture, believe in Chinese beliefs, and have Chinese nationality, they are part of the Chinese people. I can teach them the art of cultivation." Du Fei listened attentively, especially when he heard the words, "have Chinese nationality." He couldn't help cheering in his heart and thought to himself, "Jinren Li is really cunning. It's too embarrassing to refuse directly, but he actually gave these foreign devils such a difficult problem. Are these foreign devils willing to change their nationality for cultivation?" Vote for recommendation previous page. Return to the table of contents, next page, error report. If you like, please click here to add Raising a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Raising a Fox at Homes in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Raising a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 475. Go to WatchNet. In the eyes of other cultivators, speaking the Chinese language, learning Chinese culture, and believing in Chinese beliefs were not difficult. However, if one wanted to change their nationality, the entire concept would change. If Chris, John, and Alba wanted to learn cultivation, they would have to change from American to Chinese. Not to mention whether they were willing or not. Even if they were willing, it would be difficult for other sects to use this as an excuse to attack Li Yundong. WatchNet. 7's KOM. Du Fei secretly gave Li Yundong a thumbs up and praised him in his heart. I really didn't misjudge Li Yundong. Not to mention his cultivation at such a young age, he is also very quick-witted. In the blink of an eye, he was able to solve such a big problem. Amazing. Good means. Wei Qing also looked at Li Yundong with admiration as she translated. After she finished, Hardadef was stunned on the spot, as if he had lost his soul. John, who thought of things very simply, always thought that as long as he came, Li Yundong would accept him as an apprentice, just like in the movies, and then he would start a magical journey. But what he didn't expect was that Li Yundong knew the most important national treasure of the Chinese nation. It couldn't be passed on easily. Hardadef's face was ashen, and he stood there as if he had lost his parents. Chris also stared at Li Yundong in disbelief. She said in surprise, "You actually want us to change our nationality? You're making things difficult for me. You're going too far." Li Yundong shook his head calmly. "Chris, you're the one who's forcing me. You won't be able to understand what you're trying to learn. It's definitely not the kind of kung fu that you see in movies and TV shows. This is a technique that can surpass life and death, surpass the heavens and earth. If you can't do the 4 points, I will never accept you as my disciples. Chris looked at his determined expression and couldn't help shouting, "Then why didn't you make it clear at the beginning?" Li Yundong sighed and said with a wry smile, "I thought that you would forget all this when you went back. It's my fault. I apologize to you. I never thought that you would come back." Chris felt as if she had been humiliated. Her pretty face flushed, and her eyeballs kept rolling in her eye sockets. Seeing this, Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He shook his head and said to Su Chan, who was very obedient and silent, "Let's go." The little foxes glanced at Chris and the others, taking pleasure in their misfortune, and then walked past them. Zhou Qin glanced at Chris. She felt some sympathy for this girl who had traveled thousands of miles to China. She felt that this girl's stubbornness and persistence were somewhat similar to her own. She deliberately fell last and then said to Chris, "We Chinese have a saying that good things are strewn with setbacks. If you have seen The Journey to the West, you should know that Sun Wukong and Tang Sanzang went to the West to seek Buddhist scriptures. They went through 81 difficulties along the way and finally obtained the true scriptures. If you really want to learn cultivation, then don't be afraid of these difficulties. Take these difficulties as your tests. Only real tests and tempering will make you stand out." After that, she sighed softly and followed Li Yundong closely onto the cruise ship. Although Chris had heard Zhou Qin's words, how could she listen to them at this time? John, who was beside her, also lowered his head dejectedly and kept muttering, "What should I do? What should I do? Master won't accept me." However, after hearing Wei Qing's translation, Alba shouted angrily, "Damn it! Damn it! How can there be such an ungentlemanly man? Are all Chinese men so chauvinistic? This is male chauvinism. This is abominable dictatorship and totalitarianism. There is no reason in the world to force people to change their nationality before accepting them as disciples." After Alba cursed for a while, she suddenly said angrily to Chris, "Chris, we came to China after suffering untold hardships. We can't come here in vain. Humph, if he doesn't accept you as his disciples, then I will ruin this stupid Taoist assembly." John was shocked and said, "Alba, you can't do anything stupid." Alba said angrily, "Bullsh*t. What stupid thing? This is the stupidest thing you've ever done. You came to China from the United States like a fool to be taught a lesson. For God's sake, is there anything more stupid than this?" John said angrily, "Sh*t. The stupidest thing in the world is that you were F***king dumped by Jack, and then F***king followed us here." Alba was so ashamed that her eyebrows were raised. "What did you say?" Chris finally couldn't stand it anymore. She said angrily, "Shut up, both of you." Alba and John turned to look at Chris at the same time. The two of them frowned and glared at her angrily. Chris glared at them without showing any weakness, then pointed to the side of the road and said, "Do you want these Chinese people to laugh at us?" Alba said sarcastically, "These Chinese people? Those Chinese people, you can become Chinese for this stupid cultivation." Chris said angrily, "Alba, shut up." Alba snorted and turned her head away. She looked at the people on the side of the road who were pointing at them and suddenly had an idea. She laughed and said, "I know how to make trouble." As she said this, she pointed at Chris and said, "Don't F***king stop me, or I'll fall out with you." Chris looked at Alba's determined expression, pressed her forehead, and shook her head. "Do whatever you want. Let me be quiet for a while." Alba sneered. She ran to the roadside phone booth, put in a 1 yuan coin, and dialed a number. When she put down the phone and walked over proudly, Chris couldn't help but ask, "Alba, why are you calling?" Alba couldn't help laughing. "I called the police." Chris and John looked at Alba with their mouths agape and stammered, "What? You called the police?" Alba laughed and said, "They won't let us attend the Taoist assembly, so I won't let them hold it. I just called the police station and told them that someone was holding an illegal party." Chris was shocked and said, "Alba, are you crazy? Don't you know that it's illegal to lie to the police? Do you want to be arrested and sent back to China? Alba laughed and said, Okay, send me back. It'll save me a plane ticket. John said sarcastically, Come on, they'll send you to a remote place to dig sand. When you earn enough money for the plane ticket, they'll send you back. Given the cheap labor commission in China, I think you won't be able to earn back the money for the plane ticket until you're old. The American media had always demonized the totalitarian rule of China. When Alba heard what John said, she was also a little afraid. She stared blankly and said, No way? Is it really that scary? John added fuel to the fire. That's right. Think about it. A young, beautiful, sexy, and adorable girl like you is stranded in a construction site in the wilderness. There are only barbaric and vulgar men there. What kind of terrifying and inhuman torture would you have to endure every night? Alba was so frightened by John that her face changed a little. She stammered, John, don't scare me. Chris saw that Alba was really frightened. She glared at John and then comforted him. Alba, did you use English on the phone just now? Alba nodded, then opened her mouth and pointed to her tongue. Of course. Do I look like someone who can tie a bow knot with her tongue? John laughed and said, You idiot. Can they understand you if you call the police in English? Alba patted her chest and felt a little relieved. It's better if they don't understand. Chris suddenly thought of something and said, It seems that China's current alarm system has a recording device. Alba became nervous again. What? Then let's hurry up and run. Chris looked at Alba with a mixture of anger and amusement. She thought for a moment and said, Let's wait in a place farther away and see what happens. John and Alba looked at each other and nodded together. Then, they quickly fled the scene with Chris like thieves. Just as Chris and the others were looking at the white yacht from afar anxiously, Li Yundong and the others had already arrived at the yacht. Before boarding the yacht from the dock, Li Yundong saw a yellow-faced, yellow-bearded man standing at the entrance of the yacht's deck. The man saw Li Yundong and the many beautiful women behind him. He was slightly stunned and frowned secretly. He said in a deep voice, Please report your sect and hand over the golden invitation. This is Sun Beitian, the Shibua of Wanjinyuan, the leader of the Gazao sect. He is a great cultivator who lives in seclusion. His cultivation and kung fu are definitely not inferior to that of Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school. I didn't expect him to come out today and even act as a greeter. It seems that the Gazao sect really attaches great importance to the Taoist assembly today. Li Yundong nodded slightly. He turned to Du Fei, who had come in with him, and said with a smile, Jinren Du, please go first. Du Fei was slightly stunned, but he didn't think too much about it. He cupped his hands and smiled at Li Yundong, then quickly walked to the front and took the initiative to hand over a golden invitation. Sun Beitian opened it and glanced at it with a smile on his face. He said, It turns out to be Jinren Du of the Chuanjian Dragon sect. Please come in. After that, he took a deep breath and said in a clear voice, Jinren Du and Jinren Wei of the Chuanjian Dragon sect have arrived. At this time, there were more than a dozen cultivators from different sects on the yacht. There were about 200 or 300 of them. They were chatting when they heard a shout outside. They immediately quieted down and looked at the door one after another. As the eldest Shixiang of the Chuanjian Dragon sect, although Du Fei's cultivation and kung fu were not the best, he was a forthright person and held great economic power in the sect, so his words carried a lot of weight in the cultivation world. As soon as he arrived, everyone looked at him. Some of them had never seen Du Fei before, so they wanted to see what this world-famous, jade-faced golden monkey looked like. They looked over and saw that the first person to come in was a tall girl with a pleasant appearance. When the girl saw everyone looking at her, she blushed and turned her eyes. Then, she saw Yu Sheng and the others of the Chuanjian Dragon sect and quickly ran over to them and sat down. Only Du Fei entered the door alone. He was not in a hurry to take his seat. He just smiled and cupped his hands at everyone. Everyone saw that Du Fei was still neither humble nor arrogant on such an occasion. He smiled calmly and had an extraordinary bearing. They all secretly praised him in their hearts, He is indeed the eldest Shixiang of the Chuanjin dragon sect. His bearing is really amazing. After seeing Du Fei enter, Li Yundong smiled at Ziyuan and said, "You go first." Ziyuan asked curiously, "Do you want to go in last?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I want to wait for them to get tired of looking at me. When I go in again, they won't look at me." Ziyuan smiled and said, "Now that your cultivation is so powerful, are you still afraid of being looked at?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "The more powerful a cultivator is, the more afraid they are of being looked at. Otherwise, why would those masters hide? I have to keep a low profile." Wan Hongling giggled and said, "It's useless. A man like you will attract attention wherever he goes." Li Yundong laughed. Ziyuan shook her head with a smile and handed over the golden invitation with Wan Hongling. Sun Beitian opened the golden invitation and looked at it. He looked at Ziyuan with some emotion and said, "It turns out that you are Wang Yuanshan's disciple. You are indeed extraordinary. Please come in." After that, he announced in a loud voice, "Jinren Ziyuan and Jinren Wan Hongling, the disciples of Wang Yuanshan of the Jingyi school of the Linggong sect, have arrived." At this time, when the cultivators on the yacht heard this, they all whispered to each other, "Could it be that beautiful Ziyuan? Could it be that Ziyuan, who is known as the top master of the younger generation? Look, we have to take a good look at her." Many of the cultivators in these sects cultivated in seclusion. They would only enter the world once at the Taoist assembly. Therefore, they had only heard of Ziyuan's name and had never seen her appearance. At this time, some curious young men all stood up to see Ziyuan's appearance. At this time, they saw Wan Hongling enter the yacht first. This woman was extremely beautiful, and her eyes were bright and black, which left a deep impression on them. They couldn't help but nod and say, "Yes, she is indeed beautiful." But then a woman in a white dress walked in from behind. This woman seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist, giving people a feeling of smoke shrouding the cold water and the moon shrouding the sand. They only felt a wave of beauty that could topple a city rush towards them, causing everyone present to hold their breath for a moment, not daring to breathe too loudly. At this time, everyone's mind was filled with the same thought, this must be Ziyuan. How could there be another woman in the world who is so ethereal? Ziyuan had long been accustomed to being stared at like this. She walked to a corner with a cold expression. After sitting down with Wan Hongling, there were still many young cultivators who couldn't control themselves and craned their necks to look at her. After seeing Ziyuan go in, Li Yundong, who was outside, also calmed down a little. He turned to Su Chan and the little foxes and said, "Don't make any trouble later or I won't take you out again." Su Chan blinked, covered her mouth with both hands, and said in a muffled voice, "Don't worry, I won't say anything even if you beat me to death." The little foxes all followed suit and said, "I won't say anything even if you beat me to death." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He walked up to Sun Beitian and handed over his golden invitation. Sun Beitian seemed to be very uncomfortable with Li Yundong's behavior of being surrounded by beautiful women. He sneered secretly and casually took the golden invitation and flipped through it. When he saw it, he was suddenly stunned. He suddenly raised his head and asked, "Are you Li Yundong, the leader of the Fox Zen schools?" Li Yundong nodded with a smile and said, "Yes." Sun Baitian's eyes widened. He looked Li Yundong up and down carefully for a while, then asked, "Are you the Li Yundong who made a scene in the ancestral court of Mount Gazao? Good news doesn't go out, but bad news spreads thousands of miles." Li Yundong smiled helplessly and said, "It seems to be me." Sun Beitian laughed angrily. "I was afraid that you wouldn't come today, but I didn't expect you to come." Good. After that, Sun Beitian announced loudly, "The leader of the Fox Zen school, Li Yundong, has arrived with his disciples." At this time, most of the people on the yacht were still immersed in Ziyuan's amazing beauty. At this time, when they heard Sun Baitian shout, they were all shocked at the same time. Zhang Ling, in particular, opened her eyes and stood up abruptly. Her eyes were shining brightly as she looked at the door. As soon as she stood up, Zhou Ping and the other disciples of the Jingyi school also stood up and looked at the door with unfriendly eyes. Zhang Tsuni, Yu Sheng, Zhang Tianhe, and Wang Lingfei, the young handsome men who had had conflicts with Li Yundong, all stood up at the same time and stared at the door. Although some of the cultivators had never seen this young cultivator who had been in the limelight recently, they had more or less heard of Li Yundong stopping the heroes on Mount Tianlong and snatching food from the tiger's mouth on Mount Gazao. They were secretly surprised and curious. They all stood up at the same time and thought, what's so great about this Li Yundong? Could it be that he has 3 heads and 6 arms? For a moment, everyone on the yacht stood up at the same time and looked at the door, waiting to see what Li Yundong, who was famous all over the world, looked like. Chapter 476. Go to Watch Net. When everyone stretched their necks and looked up, a slim and graceful woman suddenly came in front of them. This woman was extremely beautiful, and there was a cold and stern temperament between her eyebrows. After she came in, she glanced at the crowd lightly. Although she looked quite unfamiliar, she did not have stage fright under everyone's gaze. Instead, her bright eyes made some cultivators subconsciously avoid looking at her. Go to Watch Net. When everyone saw this, they were secretly surprised and wondered, which sect is this female cultivator from? How can she have such a strong aura? What's more, her appearance and temperament are so outstanding. Has there been another female cultivator in the cultivation world who can stand shoulder to shoulder with Zi Yuan? Ding Nan, who had been standing next to Zheng Yuan, saw this and was even more shocked. She gritted her teeth and thought to herself, damn it, I thought I was cultivating very fast, but I didn't expect Zhou Qin to be even faster. Damn it. Why am I always one step behind her? Am I not as good as her? Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Zheng Yuan, who was standing to one side, stared at Zhou Qin with a trace of shock on his face. He thought to himself, how is this possible? She has actually reached the Zhuji phase. How could her cultivation speed be so fast? Damn it, Li Yundong must have fed her the Rinyuan Jindan. While the two of them were thinking about it, they suddenly saw a girl with rolling eyes behind Zhou Qin. The girl's eyebrows were lively, her eyes were bright, and her appearance was beautiful and charming. There was a hint of immaturity in her beauty, but when she rolled her eyes, there was a hidden charm, which made people involuntarily think, when this girl grows up in the future, she will definitely be a peerless beauty who can turn all living things upside down. The girl was Su Chan. At a glance, she saw everyone's eyes fixed on her. Many male cultivators showed unconcealable greed and possessiveness. She was shocked and shrank back, hiding behind Li Yundong. It was as if she could only feel safe behind this boy. Li Yundong smiled and patted the little girl's head, then walked in by himself. As soon as he entered the yacht, he immediately felt everyone's sharp gazes directed at him. It was like a battlefield filled with blades, spears, swords, and halberds. The surroundings were filled with murderous intent and killing intent. If it had been in the past, Li Yundong's qi might have been stimulated and burst out like a bomb exploding. But now, his qi had changed from being released to being restrained, and his character was not as quick as before. If Li Yundong had been a long river of New River in the past, he would roar majestically and set off huge waves to smash any obstacles in his way. But now, Li Yundong was a towering mountain. No matter how strong he was like a cool breeze caressing the mountain. In the face of this aggressive and suffocating gaze, Li Yundong smiled slightly and cupped his hands to the crowd. Then, he took Su Chan and the little foxes and walked unhurriedly to where Zi Yuan was sitting. The cultivators on the ship saw that Li Yundong's bearing was calm and steady. He was not as sharp as the rumor said, nor did he have that aggressive aura. They couldn't help but think, is Li Yundong afraid? Only a few cultivators, such as Zhang Ling and Zhang Tianhe, vaguely felt that Li Yundong's aura had changed, but they couldn't tell what was different. Zhang Tsuni of the Qingqing sect watched Li Yundong swagger through the market with a group of fox spirits, especially when he sat down next to Zi Yuan in front of everyone. He couldn't help snorting coldly. What an anomaly. In this day and age, there are actually bullies running rampant and evildoers dancing wildly. He. Zhang Tianhe, who was not far away from him, heard his words and glanced at Zhang Xuni. Then, he snorted coldly and looked at Li Yundong unkindly. Especially when he saw Li Yundong and Ziyuan talking intimately, he couldn't help but show jealousy in his eyes. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails pierced into his flesh, but he didn't even notice it. Most of the cultivators next to Zhang Tianhe were paying attention to Li Yundong and this group of incomparably dazzling fox spirits. Only Zhou Ping looked at Zhang Tianhe affectionately, but when she saw Zhang Tianhe staring at Ziyuan, she couldn't help but feel a pain in her heart. She gritted her teeth and said to herself, if it weren't for that little b*** Ziyuan, Shitty would have been with me. It's all that b*** tch's fault. Not only did she take away my Shitty's heart, but she also sat with Li Yundong in public. This is betrayal. Does this woman have any shame? Humph. I must make her lose her reputation. Although Li Yundong's cultivation was excellent, he was not an immortal after all. How could he know the thoughts of everyone in the various sects? After he entered the yacht, he secretly looked around. In his eyes, the yacht was decorated with about 20 or 30 square tables. Beside each table were 10 square stools, and there was an incense burner on the table. In the middle of these dozens of square tables was a large square table. This square table was against the wall, and on it was placed the statue of Laozi, the founder of Taoism. On both sides of Laozi were the statues of Yuanshi Tianzuan and Lingbao Tianzuan. Next to the heavenly primogenitor were the statues of the founders of the Taoist Assembly, Great Jinren Luo Gongyuan and Yi Fashion. On the other side, next to the heavenly primogenitor Lingbao were the statues of the Jade Emperor and the Queen Mother. On the wall behind these statues was a huge yin-yang 8 trigrams. On both sides of the 8 trigrams were a pair of couplets. The upper couplet on the right was, Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. The lower couplet on the left was, Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows nature. In the middle of the couplet were 4 big words, The Great Way is invisible. When Li Yundong saw this couplet, he couldn't help cheering in his heart. He turned to Zhou Qin and said, Zhou Qin, look at this couplet. It talks about the mystery of our cultivation. You have to keep it in mind. Zhou Qin nodded in agreement. She pointed to the statues in front of the couplet in confusion and asked, I know some of these statues, but I don't know some of them. Master, can you explain them to me? After Li Yundong came out of the 3,000 worldlets, he was no longer an ignorant person. At this time, he had read the classics of Buddhism and Taoism. He smiled and explained them one by one. Su Chan and the little foxes beside him also pricked up their ears and listened with great interest. Just as they were whispering to each other, they suddenly heard a crisp ding sound. This crisp sound was like the ringing of a bell. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound. Li Yundong and the others also stopped talking and looked up. Li Yundong saw a cultivator, who was about 1.7 meters tall, with deep eyes and a high nose, and a goatee on his chin, coming out from the back of the cabin. He was the host of this Taoist assembly, Wang Jinyuan, the leader of the Gazao sect. Wang Jinyuan was wearing a Taoist robe with long sleeves fluttering in the wind, looking quite elegant. His bright eyes swept across the crowd quickly. When he glanced at Li Yundong's table, his eyes paused for a moment, but he quickly looked away. Wang Jinyuan walked to the square table at the head of the table, cupped his hands to the crowd, and said, Fellow Taoists, thank you for giving me face and coming to the Taoist assembly. I'm deeply honored. This Taoist assembly will be. Before he could finish his words, he heard someone shouting impatiently, Master Wan, hurry up and take out the rewards of this Taoist assembly. We're here to get treasures, not to listen to you. As soon as this person said this, Li Yundong smiled knowingly, because the person who spoke was none other than Dang Chong of the Pernlai sect, whom he had met several times. Dang Chong was sitting at a table with one foot on a stool next to him. He was munching on melon seeds as he yelled. His actions were very conspicuous in the crowd, causing the people around him to roll their eyes at him. Wang Jinyuan was choked by Deng Chong's words and suddenly couldn't continue. He was angry in his heart and glanced at Deng Chong, but he still smiled and said, "It turns out to be a fellow Taoist from the Pringlai sect. Nice to meet you." Deng Chong laughed and said, "Master Wan, you must want to slap me to death. Last time on Mount Gazao, you wanted it even more this time. Don't be so hypocritical. Hurry up and get to the point." Although Deng Chong was as shameless as a ruffian, his words were crude, and his reasoning was not crude. Some cultivators in the cabin couldn't help but laugh and jeer. "Well said, Master Wan. Hurry up and get to the point. We're all itching to get impatient." "That's right. We've cultivated for more than 10 years. Did we come here to listen to your nonsense? Hurry up and fight." "Yes, Master Wan. What's the treasure this time? Take it out, and let us have an eye-opener." Wang Jinyuan's face was a little ugly. He forced a smile and was about to speak when he suddenly saw Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school slap the table and stand up. She said sternly, "Nonsense. Do you think this is a vegetable market? You're still cultivators. If I didn't know better, I would think that you were all a group of hooligans. Do you think you're a gang or a club?" Zhang Ling was a famous cultivator in Jianghu, and she was also the sister of Taoist Zhang of the Jingyi school. Her bearing and prestige were extremely high. As soon as she shouted, the hall suddenly became silent, and no cultivator dared to speak again. Wang Jinyuan glanced at Zhang Ling with an unnatural expression and thought to himself, the power of the Jingyi school is really great. Does Zhang Ling, this fierce dragon, want to overturn the rivers and seas and steal my leadership at the Taoist assembly? While he was thinking this, Zhang Ling said to him, "Master Wan, the Taoist assembly held once every 4 years is extraordinary. This is not only a good opportunity for our Taoist sects to recover their vitality and return to the orthodox tradition, but also a good opportunity for our Taoist sects to let go of their past grievances and work together." When Wang Jinyuan heard this, he suddenly became vigilant. He thought to himself, return to the orthodox tradition? Who is the orthodox tradition? Let go of their past grievances and work together? The Jingyi school can't help it anymore. They're going to show their true colors. They're going to unify the Taoist sects. Thinking of this, Wang Jinyuan couldn't help interrupting Zhang Ling. He asked with a fake smile, "Then dare I ask Shinran Zhang Ling, what is the orthodox tradition?" Zhang Ling snorted and waved her hand. Then all the people in Taoist robes of the Jingyi school stood up. Zhang Ling pointed at the Taoist robes they were wearing and said, "This is the orthodox tradition." This sentence was meaningful. It not only satirized others for forgetting their ancestors and not even wearing the clothes that Taoist priests should wear at the Taoist assembly, but also hinted that the Jingyi school was the orthodox tradition in the world. Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, "Is wearing Taoist robes the orthodox tradition?" He waved his hand and shouted, "Come out, all of you." Then, a group of Taoist priests in Taoist robes came out of the cabin and looked at the people of the Jingyi school with unfriendly eyes. Zhang Ling saw that these Taoist priests had blocked the yacht and surrounded it. She sneered and said, "What's the matter? Master Wan, are you going to catch us all in one fell swoop?" Although everyone could hear the intention of sowing discord in her words, they still couldn't help being frightened and vigilant. They looked at the other Taoist priests of the Gazao sect with hostility. Seeing that the situation was about to break out, they suddenly heard a shameless voice say leisurely, "If wearing a Taoist robe is the orthodox tradition, then I am also the orthodox tradition." Everyone looked over and saw Deng Chong speaking with a cheeky smile on his face. Someone next to him sneered and said, "You're wearing a vest. How is that a Taoist robe?" Deng Chong jumped up with a laugh and said carelessly, "Brothers of the Tao, look carefully." After saying that, he quickly took off his clothes. In a short while, he was completely naked. The male cultivators in the cabin all laughed in horror, while the female cultivators all blushed and spat, then turned their faces away. Wang Jinyuan shouted angrily, "Deng Chong, what are you doing?" Deng Chong laughed. He picked up a cup of tea with one hand and said, "I'll wear a Taoist robe for you to see." As he said this, he poured the tea on his body and quickly smeared it everywhere with his hands. Everyone saw that there seemed to be a mass of ink hidden in Dang Chong's palm. Wherever he smeared it, it would be dark. After a while, Dang Chong had painted a close-fitting Taoist robe on his body, as if he was playing with body painting. After Dang Chong finished, he clapped his hands and laughed. "How about it? Brothers of the Tao, is this a Taoist robe?" Everyone saw that Dang Chong was wearing a colorful Taoist robe on his chest, but his white body was on his back. They were surprised and laughed at the same time. "Dang Chong, what kind of Taoist robe is this? Where's your butt? Why isn't your butt covered by the Taoist robe? Dang Chong, what's that thing in front of you? Is it a dust handle?" Dang Chong said without any shame, "What is a Taoist robe? Can it cover your shame? If it could, how could you quarrel like this at the Taoist assembly, which is held once every 4 years? His words had a double meaning, and they immediately attracted the cheers of all the cultivators from the other sections. For a moment, the tense atmosphere was greatly reduced. Li Yundong also nodded with a smile and said to Ziyuan, "This Dang Chong is a ruffian, but he's not a ruffian." Ziyuan's cheeks turned slightly red. She whispered, "But there's no need to be like this, naked, right?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "I came naked when I was born and left naked when I died. That's a man of character." Ziyuan glared at Li Yundong angrily. "Then why don't you go and be a man of characters?" Li Yundong chuckled and didn't answer. At this time, Wang Jinyuan snorted coldly and waved his hand again. The Taoists disappeared in an instant, as if they had never appeared. He glanced at Dang Chong and then said to Zhang Ling with a sneer, "I'm just telling you, Zhang Ling, that you are not the only one who remembers the orthodox Taoism." Zhang Ling also sneered and said, "I also want to remind all the cultivators not to forget their roots at the Taoist assemblies." As she said this, she also sat down with the cultivators of her own sect. The people of the other sects saw the secret battle between Wang Jinyuan and Zhang Ling, but in fact, it represented the battle between the number 1 sect of the Niden sect and the number 1 sect of the external alchemy. They all frowned at the same time and thought, has the battle in the cultivation world become so intense? How could he not be able to restrain himself from fighting after just a few words at the Taoist assembly? Su Chan tugged at Li Yundong's sleeve curiously and asked in a low voice, "Yundong, why do I feel like they are going to fight?" Li Yundong chuckled and said in a low voice, "It's okay. Let's just watch them fight." While the two of them were talking in low voices, they heard Wang Jinyuan say, "Since no one wants to listen to nonsense, I won't be long-winded. Let's get someone to bring out the prize of this Taoist assembly." After that, he shouted, "Bring out the powerful magical weapon." Su Chan and Li Yundong stopped talking at the same time and looked at the field at the same time. They both wanted to see what the prize of the Taoist assembly, which was held once every 4 years, would be. Vote recommendation, previous page. Next page, error report. If you like it, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Homes in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 477. Go to WatchNet. Wang Jinyuan shouted, and soon 2 beautiful female Taoist priests in Taoist robes came out from the back of the cabin. The 2 female Taoist priests came out holding a large brush that was 2 meters long and nearly half a meter thick. Go to WatchNet. 7KOM. Everyone saw the huge brush at first glance, and some people who didn't know what it was laughed. "Master Wan, what is this?" Dang Chong, who had put his clothes back on the boat, shouted, "Master Wan, why are you fooling us with such a thing? Isn't this a large mop?" Everyone burst out laughing. Wang Jinyuan really hated Dang Chong in his heart. He gritted his teeth and was angry in his heart, but his face was full of smiles. He said with a smile, "Zhenren Dang Chong is so funny. Fellow Taoists, do you know what kind of powerful magical weapon this is?" There were also cultivators who knew what it was. They carefully looked at the huge brush, and Ziyuan vaguely saw some clues. She whispered to Li Yundong, "It seems to be an immortal pen?" "An immortal pen?" Li Yundong looked at it carefully and nodded slightly. "It does look a little like it." Su Chan, who was standing to one side, straightened up and said in a low voice, "Is it the magical item used by Wuxia during the Three Kingdoms period, the immortal pen?" Ziyuan looked at her with a smile. "It seems so." Su Chan's eyes widened, and she said in surprise, "Is it an immortal pen that can write talismans and divine thunder of the 5 elements at will?" Li Yundong smiled and pinched her nose. "It seems to be this immortal pen." Su Chan became excited all of a sudden. "Oh, Yundong, this is a great treasure. You have to get it. You have to get it." Although Zhou Qin had succeeded in the Zhuji phase, her understanding of these powerful magical weapons was almost like a blank piece of paper. She couldn't help asking Su Chan, "What kind of treasure is this? Why are you so excited?" Su Chan grabbed Zhou Qin's arm and asked with her eyes wide open, "Sister Zhou Qin, do you know who Go Hong is who wrote Hugging Pusey?" Zhou Qin nodded in confusion. "Yes. He is a cultivator who wrote a book to tell the world that gods can't cultivate, but immortals can. Do you know who Go Hong's master is?" Su Chan asked again. Zhou Qin had also read a lot of Taoist classics, so this knowledge was not difficult for her. She became more and more confused. "Yes, Zheng Yin. Do you know who Zheng Yin Shifu is?" Su Chan asked. Zhou Qin laughed and said, "Of course I know. It's the Tai Chi immortal Ge Xian, Go Hong's grandfather." "Su Chan, are you testing me?" Su Chan's eyes widened. "Do you know who Ge Xian's master is?" Zhou Qin was stunned for a moment and said, "Is it Wuxia?" Su Chan shook Zhou Qin's arm excitedly. Yes, Wuxia is the master of the Taiji Immortal. He was also the founder of the Pill Cauldron sect. This immortal pen was his personal Dharma treasure. Think about it, Fahai's personal magic tool was already so powerful. Isn't this immortal pen even more powerful? Ziyuan, who was standing to one side, also nodded and added, "Yes, it's said that the immortal pen can write talismans at will. Even if you write the word thunder, it can attract thunder from the sky." Seeing that Zhou Qin still didn't understand the mystery of the immortal pen, Li Yunyang explained with a smile, "Zhou Qin, you are now full of Jinqi, which is equivalent to a great master with great internal strength in wuxia novels. However, you don't know martial arts moves, so if you fight with others, you may not be able to defeat those cultivators whose Jinqi is not as good as yours, but who know a lot of martial arts moves. Especially those cultivators who use talismans. Because they use talismans when they cast magic, they have the 3 characteristics of speed, accuracy, and ruthlessness. Su Chan once gave me a heavenly thunder talisman. When I used it to cast spells, it only took a few seconds. I could do whatever I wanted, and I didn't have to worry about being hit at all. But if I didn't use the talisman and used my own Jinqi, it would take at least a minute or even more. The most important thing was that I had to worry about being hit." Hearing this, Zhou Qin suddenly understood. "Ah, I understand. Are these talismans very rare at ordinary times?" Ziyuan took over the conversation, nodded, and said, "Very rare. It's not an exaggeration to say that they're worth a lot of gold." Only then did Zhou Qin look at the immortal pen in horror. "So, if anyone has the immortal pen, doesn't it mean that they have unlimited talismans to use?" Ziyuan laughed and said, "That's not true. If you want to use a magical item like the immortal pen, it will consume a lot of essence qi to write a talisman. I guess if I write 2 talismans like this, all my Jinqi will be used up." Zhou Qin frowned and said, "Then what's the use of this divine item?" Su Chan interrupted with a smile. "Sister Zhou Qin, you're so stupid. You can write it for self-defense. Moreover, talismans weren't something that just anyone could write. The process of learning talismans is very complicated and difficult to understand. My master can only write heavenly thunder talismans, and I can only write invisibility talismans. I can't write anything else." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "I see. I was ignorant." As she said this, she turned her head to look at Li Yundong and urged, "Master, why don't you snatch this immortal pen? It'll be like adding wings to a tiger if you hold it in your hand." Li Yundong had originally thought that Wang Jinyuan would take out the Diyuan Jindan or the Medicine King tripod, but he hadn't expected that he would take out the immortal pen. Although it was also an extremely powerful magical weapon, Li Yundong was a little uninterested in it. Li Yundong smiled and said, "I have enough powerful magical weapons. Why do I need so many? Besides, powerful magical weapons are the same as magic. They are valuable in quality, not quantity. I haven't even mastered the burning thumb pot yet, and now I have an immortal pen. Aren't you afraid of making others jealous?" Ziyuan opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she held them back and didn't say anything. Su Chan was unwilling to give up and said, "Yundong, I remember that you have visualized the Dharmakaya of the immovable Wisdom King. You have 6 magical items in your hands, and one of them is this immortal pen. It means that it will be your powerful magical weapon sooner or later." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Since it will be mine sooner or later, I'm not in a hurry. Don't you see so many people here looking at this immortal pen eagerly? Since so many people want to snatch it, I won't join in the fun. If it's really mine, even if I don't want to snatch it, it will still fall into my hands." Wan Hongling, who had been silent all this time, snorted and muttered in a low voice, "You have a powerful magical weapon to use, but should Ziyuan?" Before she could finish speaking, Ziyuan stepped on her foot under the table and glared at her. She didn't continue speaking. Hearing this, Li Yundong looked at Ziyuan in confusion and asked, "Ziyuan, what's wrong with you?" Ziyuan smiled. Just as she was about to speak, someone in the field suddenly made a noise and said loudly, "Master Wan, this is the immortal pen. This powerful magical weapon hasn't appeared in the world for more than 1,000 years. How did you get it?" Wang Jinyuan looked proud. He smiled and stroked his goatee, saying, "Yes, this is the immortal pen used by Taoists Wuxia. If you don't believe me, you can have a look." After that, he pressed his hand on the huge brush, and it immediately shrank automatically. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk into a small brush that was only 20 centimeters long. Wang Jinyuan picked up the immortal pen, and the beautiful female Taoist of the Gazao sect next to him obediently held a cup of tea with both hands. Wang Jinyuan picked up the pen and dipped it in the tea. Then, he wrote the word flower in the air. The word floated in the air without dispersing. After a while, it quickly emitted a dazzling, colorful brilliance, and then quickly turned into blooming flowers in front of everyone. Wang Jinyuan laughed and flicked his sleeve, shattering the flowers hanging in the air. For a moment, petals fell in the cabin, and the fragrance of flowers filled the air. Zhou Qin was stunned. She said in surprise, "You can make flowers appear by writing the word flower?" Su Chan also looked at the immortal pen with greed and envy and said, "What about the word money?" He couldn't help laughing. He snapped his fingers and flicked Su Chan's forehead. "Greedy girl, you only know how to make money." Ziyuan also couldn't help laughing and said, "Flowers are the fruits of wood. The immortal pen can only write about the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth, as well as wind, thunder, and lightning, and turn them into real things. If you write the word money, it won't be able to make money." Su Chan couldn't help but be disappointed. She held her forehead and pouted. At this time, everyone in the cabin believed that this pen was the immortal pen. Their eyes became extremely excited, and they secretly rubbed their palms. They were just waiting for the Taoist assembly to show off their power and seize the treasure. Although Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school was experienced and knowledgeable, she couldn't help but be shocked by the prize that Wang Jinyuan had taken out. She couldn't help but ask, "Master Wan, how could you be willing to take out such a treasure as a reward?" Wang Jinyuan laughed heroically. "For the prosperity of our Taoist culture and the prosperity of the cultivation world again, I will not hesitate to destroy the Gazao sect." His words caused everyone to cheer in unison. They all said, "Master Wan is so bold." Master, one is so broad-minded. Zhang Ling frowned and thought to herself, no, Wang Jinyuan is not such a selfless person. He has taken out such an important, powerful magical weapon, so he must be planning something big. But what was he plotting? Could it be that he is trying to buy people's hearts? But the price is too high, isn't it? While Zhang Ling was thinking to herself, she saw that some cultivators in the cabin were already impatient and clamoring, "Don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and fight. Let's see who can take away this immortal pen." Wang Jinyuan pressed his hands together and said loudly, "Everyone, don't worry. Listen to me." It was unknown whether Wang Jinyuan's heroic words had aroused the respect of everyone, or whether it was because Wang Jinyuan had taken out the immortal pen that had shocked everyone. As soon as he spoke, the noisy people immediately shut their mouths. Wang Jinyuan said, "Everyone, we are all respected cultivators. Of course, we can't fight randomly like hooligans. Even if we want to fight, we have to come up with a rule." Immediately, a cultivator said with a smile, "Master Wan, you worry too much. We will follow the rules of the previous Taoist assembly." Wang Jinyuan said, "Of course not. In the past, the Taoist assembly was held in the depths of the mountains. No one knew if we fought earth-shattering. But this time, we're holding the meeting in the middle of a busy city. Both sides of the moat are either residential areas, shopping malls, or entertainment venues. If we fight, the people outside will be able to hear the commotion. Do you want to turn the place upside down?" The 200 or so cultivators in the cabin were dumbfounded when they heard this. Some of them said, "Master Wan, if we can't fight, how can we fight?" Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, "So, this time, the rule is, you have to fight, and at the same time, you have to make sure that the mortals outside don't notice. What do you think?" The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other. Some of them had low cultivation quotients, so they secretly retreated. Some of them, who had high cultivation quotients, said loudly, "Master Wan, let's do as you say." After a while, most of the cultivators nodded in agreement. Wang Jinyuan nodded and said with a smile, "Well, since everyone has agreed, I wonder which Shinran will come out and show his skills first." As soon as he finished speaking, a young man in a Tang suit stood up. He cupped his hands and said, "Master Wan, I'll go first." Wang Jinyuan took a look and saw that the man had tiger-like eyes and a lion-like nose, and his face was awe-inspiring. Wang Jinyuan cupped his hands and said, "It turns out to be Jinren Chen Yunyan of the Qingwei sect. Sorry for not recognizing you." Chen Yunyan looked around and asked, "Master Wan, may I challenge you by name?" Wang Jinyuan nodded and said with a smile, "As long as you follow the rules, of course you can." Chen Yunyan nodded, then suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Yundong with his eyes like lightning. He pointed at him like a sword and said, "Li Yundong, do you dare to accept the challenge?" I sincerely apologize to all my readers. Because of some urgent personal matters, I just flew back to Shenzhen from Suzhou. That's why I was delayed yesterday and today. There is still one chapter to update tonight. I will try to make up for yesterday's lack of updates tomorrow. I apologize again. Chapter 478. Go to WatchNet. When Li Yundong saw that Chen Yunyan, whom he had never met before, was the first to challenge him, he was stunned and thought to himself, "Why are you looking for me?" Zi Yuan chuckled and said, "Of course I'm looking for you. Who told you to be so popular now? Who doesn't want to defeat you and become the #1 master of the younger generation?" Li Yundong shook his head and smiled. False reputation is harmful. He stood up, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, "Jinren Chen, thank you for your high opinion of me. I, Li Yundong, should naturally accept the challenge. But before I do, can you tell me why you picked me out of so many cultivators?" Chen Yunyan sneered and said, "Jinren Li, do you remember that you defeated my shitty in the Battle of Mount Tianlong?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and vaguely remembered that he seemed to have defeated a cultivator from the Qingwei sect. However, because the cultivator had launched a sneak attack, he had left without even saying his name. Even Li Yundong didn't know who he had defeated. Go to watch net. Li Yundong smiled and said, I seem to remember something like that. How do you want to fight, Jinren Chen? Chen Yunyan was wearing a long robe and a mandarin jacket. He shook the hem of his robe and walked over to the crowd in 2 steps. He cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan and said, Master Wan, please make an empty table. Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, What's so difficult about that? Someone make a table for Jinren Chen. As he spoke, 2 Taoists from the Gazao sect rushed over. One of them lifted the table, and the other lifted the legs of the table. They quickly assembled a square table for 8 people. Then, they bowed to Wang Jinyuan and quickly left. Everyone saw that the square table was about 1.5 meters in diameter and was made of high-quality mahogany. The edge of the table was carved with exquisite patterns. Chen Yunyan took 8 cups and a kettle from his table and placed them on the table. They whispered to each other and guessed how Chen Yunyan was going to fight with Li Yundong. Chen Yunyan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said, Jinren Li, there are 8 cups here. I will fill them with water in a moment, and then we will each use our shentong to urge thunder with water. Let's see whose shentong is more mysterious. What do you think? When everyone heard this, they immediately whispered excitedly, This battle is interesting. I just don't know what kind of effect it will have. Some knowledgeable cultivators also nodded slightly and said, Yes, the thunder spell is the most difficult spell in the world. It is extremely difficult to control the thunder in this extremely small cabin space. A little carelessness will hurt others. I just don't know if these 2 people have enough cultivation. Otherwise, they will be trapped in a cocoon of their own making. Ding Nan couldn't help whispering to Zheng Yuan, Master, why did they put 4 cups here if they want to fight with the thunder method? Zheng Yuan stroked his white beard and narrowed his eyes at Chen Yunyan. He said, There are several ways to attract thunder in this world. The first is to attract thunder with qi, just like on Mount Tianlong. Zhang Tianhe and Li Yunyang both used qi to attract thunder. The other method was to use talismans to attract thunder. For example, the Jinshan sect, Maoshan sect, and other sects mainly use talismans to cultivate thunder. Another method is to attract thunder with water. Because thunder originates from water, thunder magic can be triggered through water magic. This is also a way to attract thunder. Zheng Yuan looked Chen Yunyan up and down and secretly nodded in praise. Chen Yunyan is young, but he is very clever. Among the cultivation sects in the world, the Qingwei sect is the most proficient in attracting thunder with water. He must have heard of Li Yundong's ability to attract thunder with qi, so he wants to use his strength to attack the enemy's weakness. Hey, what a schemer! Only then did Ding Nan understand, and she looked at Li Yundong worriedly. However, Li Yundong didn't seem to notice Chen Yunyan's thoughts. He smiled and said, Why do you need to go forward? I can also fight here. His words were easy to say, but the people around him suddenly burst into an uproar, especially the cultivators of the Qingwei sect. They all glared at Li Yundong. Chen Yunyan said with an ugly expression, Jinren Li, are you so conceited? Zhou Qin frowned and whispered to Su Chan, Su Chan, why are they so angry? Su Chan looked at Li Yunyang worriedly and whispered, although it said that water is used to attract thunder, in the final analysis, it's still using one's own jinqi to catalyze the water in front of him and, finally, make the water surge into thunder. Therefore, standing closer will naturally have an advantage. Yundong is standing so far away, so his jinqi has to be transported far away. It's like a person fighting in his own territory, and Yundong has to go through a long journey to enter the battlefield. This is a big disadvantage. Ziyuan also said in a low voice, Li Yundong, don't be arrogant. Although the Qingwei sect has declined and become a small sect, the Qingwei sect is still a small sect. However, during the Yuan and Ming dynasties, this was also an impressive sect. Dao Fa Hui Yuan was written by Zhao Yizhen of the Qingwei sect, so it should not be underestimated. In particular, the Qingwei sect mainly cultivated thunder. In the world, Only the Lingxiao sect and the Jingyi school could compete with the Qingwei sect in thunder magic. Chen Yunyan is competing with you in thunder magic. You must not underestimate him. Ziyuan spoke hurriedly and quickly, reminding Li Yundong not to underestimate his opponent 3 times in a row. Although Li Yundong didn't believe that Chen Yunyan would be his opponent, he still smiled at Ziyuan gratefully and stepped to the table. When Chen Yunyan saw Li Yundong step forward, his expression became a little better. He snorted, picked up a teapot, and filled the 8 cups in front of the table with the etiquette of the tea ceremony. After Chen Yunyan put down the teapot, he cupped his hands and said, "Jinren Li, I've set the rules. How about you pick the teacups first?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'll pick the 4 left by you, Jinren Chen." Seeing that Li Yundong was so arrogant, Chen Yunyan frowned secretly and sneered. He quickly touched the teacups one by one, and then pushed the 4 teacups in front of him. He said in a clear voice, "I've chosen. Jinren Li, please." Li Yundong glanced at Chen Yunyan and smiled slightly. With a wave of his sleeve, the 4 teacups were neatly arranged in front of him, as if there was an invisible hand fiddling with them. Li Yundong's handsome move immediately attracted many cultivators' loud cheers. Among them, Wei Qing, a female cultivator who had a good impression of Li Yundong, cheered the loudest. Yu Sheng couldn't help frowning and saying, "Shiji, is it necessary to shout so loudly? What's so great about this?" Wei Qing said with a smile, "It's nothing great, but I just think that Jinren Li is very handsome when he uses it. If you're not convinced, why don't you use it too?" Yu Sheng rolled his eyes, snorted with his nose in the air, and didn't say anything. Wei Qing was already used to her Shiji's temper. She pulled Yu Sheng's arm and whispered, "Hey, who do you think will win?" Yu Sheng said without thinking, "Nonsense. Of course it's Li Yundong." The Qingwei sect was almost extinct during the Qing dynasty. "Who is this Chen Yunyan? I've never heard of him. He's just a nobody. He's not worth mentioning." Wei Qing said with a little flagging interest, "Ah, there's no suspense at all? I thought that since Chen Yunyan dared to take the initiative to challenge, he must have some ability." Yu Sheng snorted coldly. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw Chen Yunyan make an obeisance by cupping one hand in the other before his chest and saying in a clear voice, "Fellow Taoists, please watch carefully. I will use these 4 cups of water as a medium to attract thunder and let everyone see what a small divine tribulation looks like." Yu Sheng was stunned when he heard this. Before he could react, he saw Chen Yunyan suddenly let out a loud roar that sounded like a dragon's roar and a tiger's roar. This loud roar was so loud that it actually shook the 4 cups in front of him and made them jump up. Chen Yunyan waved one hand over the 4 cups and mobilized his Jinqi to forcibly suck up all the water in the cups. Everyone saw that 4 water columns suddenly appeared out of thin air in the 4 cups, and the liquid tea seemed to have turned into solid columns at this moment. Chen Yunyan's other hand chopped off the roots of the 4 water columns the moment they rose into the air. He held all 4 water columns in his 2 hands. He let out a loud shout and squeezed all the Jinqi in his body into the palms of his 2 hands. The 4 water columns were squeezed into a fist-sized water ball. As soon as the water ball was squeezed by his Jinqi, it immediately became smaller and smaller. Ripples could be faintly seen in the middle of the water ball because of the constant pressure. Everyone watched as Chen Yunyan mobilized his own Jinyuan, abruptly squeezing the fist-sized water ball into the size of a thumb. This water ball constantly emitted a burst of mist. This mist rose up and slowly drifted in front of Chen Yunyan, forming a small majestic cloud of mist, as if it was a cloud of mist in the sky. Although everyone didn't know what Chen Yunyan was going to do next, they knew that it was impossible to compress a fist-sized water ball into a thumb-sized water droplet unless it was an extremely powerful and condensed Niden. Seeing this, Yu Sheng couldn't help but look solemn. Wei Qing also widened her eyes and said in a low voice, "Shirdi, you're wrong. This is a great master." Then, with a shake of Chen Yunyan's hands, the thumb-sized water droplet suddenly jumped up on its own and drilled into the clouds floating in the air. In an instant, As soon as the water droplet entered the clouds, the color of the clouds gradually became thicker, as if dark clouds had covered the sky and become dark. There was also a rumbling sound of thunder slowly coming from the clouds. Even the sky outside the yacht became dark, as if it had suddenly turned from a sunny day to a cloudy one. Chen Yunyan pinched his fingers and recited quickly, "Give birth to heaven and earth, control water and fire, enlighten the gods, the master of all Tao." After he finished reciting the last word, he suddenly shouted, "Thunder!" Crack! Everyone felt as if their ears had been stabbed by a sharp blade. It was as if a bomb had suddenly exploded in the air. Everyone was shaken by the sudden clap of thunder in the cabin. The blood in their chests churned, and their eardrums were in extreme pain. Boom! Then, there was another deafening sound of thunder outside the cabin. Everyone was shocked when they heard it and thought to themselves, "Winter thunder?" Chen Yunyan used water to attract thunder, and he actually attracted winter thunder. Ziyuan looked at Chen Yunyan with awe and thought to herself, "This is the long-lost secret method of Qingwei Xinlai. Not only can this person cast thunder by himself, but he can also cause heaven thunder to rumble. This thunder cultivation is really scary." Under everyone's awe-inspiring gaze, Chen Yunyan said in a clear voice, "Everyone, please look, heaven thunder is here." As soon as he finished speaking, a small bolt of lightning fell from the clouds in front of him. The lightning fell on the teacup, causing it to tremble violently. Following that, another bolt of lightning struck the cups. What was even more terrifying was that every time a bolt of lightning struck the clouds in front of Chen Yunyan, there would be a rumbling sound of thunder coming from outside the yacht, as if it was resonating with the thunder. In the blink of an eye, 81 bolts of lightning fell from the clouds in succession. The speed was so fast that it was dizzying. Everyone felt as if there was an invisible hand covering their mouths and noses, making it hard for them to breathe. They couldn't help but think, what if this lightning strikes me? After waiting for the last bolt of lightning to strike, everyone suddenly saw the dark clouds gradually dissipate, and the sky outside the yacht gradually became clear. The 4 teacups in front of Chen Yunyan were still standing in the same place, undamaged. Chen Yunyan cupped his hands to everyone in the cabin and said, "Everyone, please have a look." After that, he gently fanned the 4 teacups with his hand. A very slight breeze blew past, and the 4 teacups turned into 4 piles of powder. Then he knocked on the mahogany square table in front of him with his hand, but there was a tapping sound. The mahogany table was still as hard as before. Everyone was shocked. They knew that the 81 bolts of heaven thunder had already smashed the teacups into powder. But when so many bolts of lightning fell, all of them were concentrated on the 4 wine cups. None of them hit the mahogany table, so the teacups turned into powder, but the table was unscathed. It was one thing for Chen Yunyan to be able to summon water into lightning, but he was also able to trigger the lightning outside to increase its power and prevent it from falling. At the same time, he was able to control the lightning that he had created to accurately strike the 4 teacups. Heaven thunder was the most difficult to control, but this person could control it as accurately as a missile. What an exquisite and terrifying thunder-controlling kung fu. Most of the people in the cabin knew what he was doing. For a moment, they were all speechless and looked at Chen Yunyan with their mouths agape. There was only one thought in their minds. When did the Qingwei sect have such a powerful master? After Chen Yunyan performed his magic, he proudly cupped his hands and said, "Jinren Li, it's your turn." Chapter 479. Go to Watch Network. For a moment, the cabin of the cruise ship was extremely quiet. Everyone stared at Chen Yunyan in a daze, as if they couldn't understand who this Sun Wukong was. After all, Zhongling was a senior of the Jingyi school and was very knowledgeable. She looked Chen Yunyan up and down in surprise and couldn't help asking, "Which branch of the Qingwei sect are you from? Who is Zhang Yunyan to you?" Chen Yunyan looked at Zhongling in surprise, then made an obeisance by cupping his hands and said, "Jinren Zhang is really amazing. You can see through my master at a glance." My original name is Qinxing, and I am the successor of Grandmaster Zhang Yunyan of the Qingwei sect. The cultivators in the hall burst into an uproar when they heard this. Zhang Tianhe couldn't help but exclaim, Zhang Yunyan still has a successor? That's impossible. Du Fei laughed and said to Yu Sheng in a low voice, it turns out that he's from the same sect. Good news, good news. Yu Sheng snorted and didn't say anything, but there was no longer any contempt in his eyes. 7th K.O.M. Wei Qing, who was next to him, said in a low voice, come on, what do you mean by from the same sect? It's been almost 1,000 years. Who would recognize him? Zhou Qin was not far from Wei Qing. When she heard Wei Qing's words, she was puzzled, so she asked Ziyuan, Ziyuan, who is Zhang Yunyan? Why did Du Fei say that Chen Yunyan is from the same sect? Ziyuan said in a low voice with a serious expression, Zhang Yunyan, also known as Zhang Daogui, is from Changsha, Hunan. He entered Mount Wudong from 1264 to 1294 AD and became the disciple of Zhenren Wangzhenchang of the Quanzhen sect. Later, he became the disciple of Huang Shenshen, the great master of the Qingwei sect. Therefore, Zhang Yunyan is a great cultivator of both the Quanzhen sect and the Qingwei sect. That's why Du Fei said that since this Chen Yunyan is a descendant of Zhang Yunyan's bloodline, then they share the same origin. Zhou Qi nodded in understanding. She asked again, is Zhang Yunyan very powerful? Why is everyone so surprised when it comes to him? Ziyuan nodded slightly and said with a serious face, this Zhang Yunyan is known as Lei Weng. As the name implies, his thunder magic is quite powerful. At that time, he could be said to be unparalleled in the world in the Tang dynasty. Moreover, Zhang Yunyan had many disciples at that time and greatly promoted the name of the Qingwei sect. It was very likely that Chen Yunyan wanted to carry forward the Qingwei sect, so he changed his name to Chen Yunyan. From this, it can be seen that this person's ambitions are not small. After hearing this, Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with a worried face. Although she had just reached the Zhuji phase and the Zhenqi in her body was vigorous, she was like a Hercules who only had strength but no moves. She had brute force but didn't know how to fight. In her opinion, Chen Yunyan's divine ability was simply a miracle. She couldn't imagine how a human could do that. Master, can he win? Zhou Qin couldn't help biting her lip and asked anxiously. Ziyuan frowned slightly. After a long time, she did not come up with a conclusion. She took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, a strong enemy. This was a rare opponent. This person's ability to control lightning was probably on par with Zhang Yunyan. I don't know if Li Yundong can resist it. Su Chan was also so anxious that she secretly stamped her feet. She looked at Chen Yunyan with a bitter face and said in a low voice, why is the first person who appeared so powerful? How can I live? Ziyuan shook her head and laughed. There are naturally many strong people in the Taoist assembly, but Chen Yunyan has endured until now. He must have a big plan. Today, he wants to use Li Yundong to make himself famous. He really has bad intentions. Zhou Qin clenched her fists tightly and stared at the field with her eyes wide open. She suddenly hated that her cultivation was still too low and she couldn't help Li Yundong out. Zhang Tsuni of the Qingqing sect also laughed in a low voice. He whispered to his companion, it seems that I don't need to do anything. I'm afraid that Chen Yunyan will solve Li Yundong's problem. This is the first time I've heard of this person's ability to control lightning, not to mention seeing it. In terms of controlling lightning, I'm afraid that no one here can compare to him. Li Yundong was too careless and fell into Chen Yunyan's trap. He brought this upon himself. He can't live. At this time, some of the cultivators in the field looked at Li Yundong with schadenfreude, while others looked at him worriedly and were secretly worried for him. However, Li Yundong stood where he was with a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened just now. He cupped his hands to Chen Yunyan and said, Zhenren Chun, good skill. Now it's my turn. Chen Yunyan suddenly looked at Li Yundong strangely. He said with a faint smile, Zhenren Li, if you admit defeat now, it's not too late. At least you can step down with dignity. Li Yundong didn't seem to hear his words. He still had a gentle smile on his face. After he came out of the tracheocosm, the anger in his body seemed to have dissipated completely. He was no longer like the immature and reckless young man he used to be, who would easily get angry. Li Yundong laughed and said, Jinren Chen's thunder control skill is really beautiful. I'm not talented, but I also want to make a fool of myself. After that, he waved his hand at the teacups in front of him. However, as soon as the wind from his palm touched the 4 teacups, the 4 teacups immediately let out a few cracking sounds and instantly broke into pieces. The tea spilled all over the table. The cultivators in the cabin suddenly burst into an uproar. Laughter and ridicule rang out incessantly. Jinrenli, are you serious? You can't even handle these teacups? That's right. The teacups have been broken. How can we fight? Zhou Qin also stood up abruptly and said in surprise, how could the teacups be broken? Wan Hongling, who had been silent all this time, gritted her teeth and said, shameful. It must be that when Qin Yunyan touched the teacups just now, he used his hidden force to break the teacups in Li Yundong's hands. He's too shameless. Zi Yuan frowned and said angrily in a low voice, Qin Yunyan can be considered a cultivator with great cultivation quotient. How could he do such a despicable thing? In order to win, he would do anything. Su Chan was so angry that her face turned red. She jumped up and couldn't help but curse loudly. However, when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she was stopped by Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan shook her head at her and whispered, the outcome hasn't been decided yet. Don't worry. Let's see how Li Yundong will deal with it. Su Chan glared at Chen Yunyan fiercely and sat down angrily. Li Yundong saw the teacup break and the tea flow all over the table, but he was not surprised at all, as if he had known that such a thing would happen. He laughed, looked at Chen Yunyan meaningfully, and said, Jinren Chen, good trick. Chen Yunyan cupped his hands with a fake smile and said, you're flattering me. I'm just giving you a taste of your own medicine. Li Yundong didn't bother to argue with him. He looked around and saw a skylight at the top of the cabin. He pointed at it and said to Wang Jinyu and Shinren Wan, it's a little stuffy here. Can you open the window? As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, a cultivator who didn't like him immediately said sarcastically, Jinrenli, are you sweating because you're afraid of guilt? That's right. A real cultivator should have the great willpower to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapses in front of him. Aren't you too useless to sweat over such a small matter? After that, there was a burst of laughter in the cabin. Next to Zhou Ping, the little shimmy of the Jingyi school, who had been looking at Li Yundong curiously, couldn't help but say to Zhou Ping softly, Shiji Zhou Ping, why do you think Li Yundong wants to open the skylight? Zhou Ping sneered and said, who knows? Maybe he wants to find a place to escape, so as not to embarrass himself? The little shimmy made a face at Zhou Ping and said, I think he seems to have a way. Don't you see how calm he is? I feel that he is like Shi Xiang. Zhou Ping sneered and said, Shimmy, only the calmness of Zhang Tianhe of the Jingyi school is the real calmness. He comes from a famous righteous sect and is also the descendant of Zhang Tianshi. His cultivation and kung fu are earth-shattering, and his every move has the bearing of a leader. This is what it means to be calm. Li Yundong is just a dabbler. Who does he think he is? How can he be compared with Shi Xiang? Hearing Li Yundong's words, Wang Jinyuan also felt strange. Why didn't Li Yundong think about fighting? Why did he open the window? Could it be that he was really hot because of his guilty conscience? He didn't think too much about it. With a wave of his hand, he ordered the doorman to open the skylight at the top of the cabin. Everyone saw that the skylight was only about half a meter square, and a ray of light came through from the outside and shone on the mahogany tea table in front of Li Yundong. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, just now, you saw a simulated heavenly tribulation. Now, I'll let you see a real one. How about it? Hearing this, everyone was stunned. Before they could react, they saw Li Yundong suddenly press his hands down. With this press, everyone suddenly felt that the yacht under their feet was sinking. It was as if the yacht had suddenly become a submarine. The hull was sinking desperately. Before everyone could panic, they saw Li Yundong smiling again. His two palms facing the ground suddenly turned into palms facing the sky, and then he pushed them up forcefully. He shouted, "Water!"
Boom.
The surroundings seemed to be set off by raging waves. These waves covered the entire yacht, and the surroundings were instantly plunged into darkness. The surrounding water surged up as if it was going straight to the sky. In the blink of an eye, it became turbulent. Chris, John, and Alba, who were looking at the cruise ship from afar by the river, were stunned to see the originally calm moat suddenly turn into a ferocious new river. They all stared at the rolling river. John stammered, "God, what's going on?" Alba widened her eyes and stammered, "Shouldn't the moat be stagnant? How could there be such a big storm?" Chris vaguely felt that this storm might have something to do with Li Yundong and these strange people, but she still couldn't believe it. She opened her mouth wide and couldn't say anything for a moment. She just stared at the cruise ship where Li Yundong was, and there was a voice full of curiosity shouting in her heart, "For God's sake, who can tell me what's going on?" At this time, the pedestrians on both sides of the river also stopped and looked at the river in astonishment. They pointed at it one by one, and some people simply picked up the mobile phones in their hands and began to take pictures. Before long, they suddenly heard a rumbling thunder coming from the sky. They were stunned, and someone couldn't help saying, "Damn, it's thunder in winter. Only Xia Yushua is left." Someone next to him also nodded and said, "Yes, there are grievances among the people." While the passers-by were whispering to each other, they suddenly heard a cracking sound coming from the sky. This sound was extremely terrifying. No matter who it was, their hearts would beat violently when they heard it. They couldn't help looking up at the sky with horror and fear in their eyes. At this time, the sky was dark and full of rolling dark clouds. The dark clouds were so low that it seemed that people could touch them if they raised their hands. There were bursts of lightning rolling in the clouds, like a cage imprisoning a thunder and lightning beast. At any time, the gate would be opened and the thunder and lightning inside would be released, destroying everything in the world. Looking at the terrifying dark clouds and thunder and lightning, everyone was panicking. Suddenly, there was another loud noise coming from the sky. Crack. The sound of the explosion made everyone feel like they were hallucinating. The sky was going to collapse. At this time, all the cultivators in the cabin couldn't help standing up and looking at Li Yundong in horror. They couldn't help shouting, "Li Yundong, are you crazy? Do you want to drag us down with you? Li Yundong, are you courting death by attracting the divine tribulation? Li Yundong, do you want to die with us?" These chaotic noises kept rushing toward Li Yundong like a raging flood. But then, a deafening thunder suddenly came from the sky, making everyone's ears buzz. No one could hear what the people in front of them were saying. They could only see their mouths opening and closing, and they could only hear the buzzing sound in their ears. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Fellow Taoists, don't panic. Even if the sky really collapses, I can hold it up." At this time, a bolt of lightning fell from the rolling dark clouds and struck the skylight of the cruise ship. However, Li Yundong didn't seem to hear the terrible thunder. He laughed, turned his right palm up, and suddenly lifted it up into the sky. Just as Li Yundong raised one of his hands in the air, the lightning accurately hit the top of his palm and exploded with a bang. Everyone looked up and saw the dark clouds rolling in the sky outside the skylight. They were so low that they seemed to be stuck to the window. The thunder and lightning in the clouds were raging wildly, tearing the clouds apart as if the sky would collapse in the next second. Before they had time to panic, they saw the thunder and lightning striking toward the skylight like rain. Li Yundong stood where he was as if nothing had happened. He raised his hand high, and the thunder and lightning struck the top of his head. They only disappeared 3 inches in front of his hand, as if Li Yundong was really holding the sky with one hand. For a moment, everyone was shocked. They looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape and thought, "What on earth is this lunatic doing?" Chapter 480. Go to watch net. Li Yundong stood motionless in the midst of the thunder and lightning, like a towering mountain. He seemed to think that everyone was not shocked enough. He waved at the broken teacup with his other hand, grabbed all the fragments in the air, and then threw them into the skylight. As he threw it, a bolt of lightning struck down and accurately struck the center of the fragments. Go to watch net. 7's KOM. Everyone felt their eyes suddenly light up, as if fireworks had been set off. For a moment, every piece of the teacup was shining and rolling in the air. However, before the shards could roll far away, another bolt of heavenly lightning struck the area around the shards of the teacup, and the shards of the teacup gathered together in the air. Everyone could see that these fragments seemed to be controlled by an invisible hand, which kept them from leaving the range of the skylight. Moreover, as the heavenly thunder continued to strike them, not only were they not directly hit by the heavenly thunder, but they were also stained with the spiritual chi of heaven and earth contained in the heavenly thunder. They looked as if they were plated with a layer of colorful glaze, dancing beautifully in the air. At this time, the cultivators in the cabin realized that Li Yundong was actually manipulating the heavenly thunder to strike the fragments of the teacup. He not only prevented the heavenly thunder from hitting them directly, but also accurately controlled them to prevent them from leaving the bombardment range. Compared to Qin Yunyan, this was 100 times more difficult. Ding Nan had been by Zheng Yuan's side for a long time, but she had never thought that someone could play magic so miraculously. He was playing with heavenly thunder as if it were his pet. This was too sensational. Zheng Yuan was also dumbfounded as he looked at the rolling fragments at the skylight. For a moment, he was so shocked that he didn't even have time to think about other things. He didn't even know that his beloved disciple was looking at Li Yundong as if she was worshipping a god. Wei Qing looked at Li Yundong with a dull face. She couldn't help whispering, "Oh my god. This is impossible, isn't it? How can a person control heavenly thunder so exquisitely? This is heavenly thunder. It's not caused by magic. How did he do it?" When Yu Sheng heard her words, he subconsciously said with a shocked face, "No, this is not the real heavenly thunder. The real heavenly tribulation, heavenly thunder, cannot be controlled by anyone. This is just the heavenly thunder simulated by Li Yundong, but it's too realistic." All the cultivators on the scene were speechless at this time. They stared blankly at the boiling heavenly thunder and the rolling debris at the skylight. After an unknown period of time, when the last bolt of heavenly lightning suddenly struck down, the fragments seemed to be suddenly pinched together by an invisible hand and became 4 perfectly intact teacups. Li Yunyang laughed and loosened his hand that was holding the sky. Suddenly, the surroundings became bright, and the rolling dark clouds in the sky slowly went away. After a while, they dissipated, and the sky became clear again. Li Yundong waved at the 4 teacups floating in the air with his other hand. The 4 teacups obediently flew to him and lined up side by side. Li Yundong placed the 4 teacups on the tea table, held one in each hand in turn, and then flicked it gently with his fingers. The teacups made a crisp sound, and colorful brilliance flowed around them. It was really colorful and dazzling. Everyone stared at the cups with their eyes wide open. They didn't understand how Li Yundong had pinched these broken teacups together again. How did he control the thunder so accurately? The cultivators present were not fools. They were all people who knew what was good and what was bad. Naturally, they knew that Chen Yunyan had broken the teacup with heavenly thunder, and Li Yundong had repaired the teacup with heavenly thunder. Zhou Qin had not been in the Tao for long, so she still couldn't see through the mysteries of these fights. She saw that everyone was looking at Li Yundong in a daze. Su Chan and Ziyuan were both happy. She vaguely guessed that Li Yundong had won, but she still couldn't help saying to Ziyuan, "Ziyuan, how is it? Tell me, how is it? Did you win?" Ziyuan's face was full of uncontrollable joy and admiration. She nodded and said, "I won." Zhou Qin immediately raised her eyebrows and asked, "How did you win?" Ziyuan glanced at Qin Yunyan and saw that the young cultivator was standing in the same place with a pale face, looking lost. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart and think to herself, since he was born, why did he give birth to Liang? If this person hadn't fought with Li Yundong, he wouldn't have been defeated so miserably. Ziyuan sighed softly and explained to Zhou Qin in a low voice, Qin Yunyan is actually a rare master of thunder control in the world. In terms of pure thunder control, except for Li Yundong, no one may be his opponent. Just now, he used water to attract thunder and lightning and simulated a small divine punishment in front of him. He controlled the thunder and lightning to hit the 4 cups, so the cups were smashed into powder. But Li Yundong also used water to attract thunder and lightning, and he used the mode of Dongwu City as a medium to attract thunder and lightning that was very similar to heavenly thunder. Its scale and power are many times greater than Qin Yunyan's just now. You should know that the more powerful the thunder, the more difficult it is to control its accuracy. The reason why Qin Yunyan was able to accurately hit the teacups just now was because the scale of the thunder and lightning was small. But what Li Yundong simulated just now was almost like heavenly thunder. Li Yundong was actually able to control such a powerful thunder and lightning accurately, and the degree of accuracy was far above Qin Yunyan's. What a terrifying method of thunder control. It's simply unimaginable and appalling. Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong in awe and continued, besides, it's always easier to destroy than to repair. Not to mention anything else. Qin Yunyan used heavenly thunder to smash the teacups and smash them into powder, which implied that there was no chance of survival under the pressure of heavenly thunder. But Li Yundong was able to repair the broken teacups with heavenly thunder, which implied that although the power of heavenly thunder was great, there was still a chance of survival hidden in it. This is in line with the principle of us cultivators transcending the divine punishment and cultivating the right way. Therefore, if Qin Yunyan is not blind, if he is not stupid, if he still has a trace of shame, he should immediately admit defeat. Because the battle between the two of them is on a completely different level. Hearing this, Zhou Qin let out a long breath. She chuckled and followed Ziyuan's gaze to look at Qin Yunyan. At this time, not only were Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others looking at Qin Yunyan, but all the cultivators in the cabin were also staring at Qin Yunyan. Almost everyone silently believed that Qin Yunyan had lost, and they were just waiting for him to admit defeat. At this time, Qin Yunyan's body was trembling slightly. He had never expected that he would still lose after exhausting all his tricks. Moreover, he had lost so completely that he had no room to argue or refute. His face was pale, and his lips were trembling, as if he wanted to use all his strength to say the words, admit defeat, but when the words came to his mouth, they seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, and he couldn't say them no matter how hard he tried. While Qin Yunyan was struggling, a man suddenly jumped up from the side and said loudly, "My Shixiang should have won this round." Everyone looked over and saw that it was a cultivator from the Qingwei sect. There was an uproar and an uproar. Do you think we are all blind and fools? If your Shixiang can win this round, I will eat all these teacups. Little boy, don't make trouble. A loss is a loss. The Qingwei sect can't afford to lose. Li Yundong looked over and saw that this man was the disciple of the Qingwei sect who had conspired with others to attack him on Mount Tianlong. He smiled slightly and cupped his hands. Fellow Taoist, you should tell me your name this time, right? The man glanced at Li Yundong and couldn't help being shocked by his bearing. His cheeks turned slightly red, and he braced himself and said, "Is the name very important?" Let's talk about the matter at hand first. Li Yundong said with a smile. Oh, what do you mean? The man stiffened his neck and said, My Shixiang made a small-scale heavenly thunder, but you made a large-scale one. This is unfair in itself, and you even want to open a skylight. This is cheating. Anyway, I'm not convinced. Everyone listened to the man's sophistry, and the last sentence gave the game away. It turns out that he really can't afford to lose. Although most of the cultivators present did not have a good impression of Li Yundong, and most of them even despised and envied the leader of the Fox Sen school, who was surrounded by beautiful women, they could not lie through their teeth and turn a good thing into a bad thing. Li Yundong saw that the man was pestering him endlessly, but he was not angry. He turned to Wang Jinyuan and said with a smile, "Master Wan, you are the host. Why don't you say something fair?" Wang Jinyuan was shocked by Li Yundong's cultivation methods. At this time, seeing that Li Yundong was quite respectful to him, he was secretly proud. He stroked his beard and said, "This battle can be said to be a fierce one. Both sides have used extremely wonderful methods of controlling thunder. It can be said that they are both good at controlling thunder. But as the saying goes, there is no first place in literature and there is no second place in martial arts. The same is true for our cultivation of fighting methods. If I have to say who is better, I still think that Jinrenli is slightly better." His words were smooth and slick. He not only gave Qin Yunyan face to step down, but also made a conclusion. He did not offend anyone. When the crowd heard this, some people secretly nodded and admired Wang Jinyuan's shrewdness. Some people secretly sneered and despised Wang Jinyuan's way of playing both sides. After hearing Wang Jinyuan's words, Qin Yunyan seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Seeing that his shitty was about to say something, he scolded him in a low voice, "Shitty, don't say anything. This game, I lost." Qin Yunyan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said unwillingly, "Jinrenli, good method. I'm convinced." Li Yundong smiled slightly and also cupped his hands to return the salute. "Jinren Chern, your cultivation and kung fu are good, but it's a pity that some of your kung fu is used in the wrong place. If you can focus on the Tao, I believe that you can continue to make progress." If these words had been said by a senior cultivator, Qin Yunyan might have had to bow his head and listen respectfully. But in Qin Yunyan's opinion, Li Yundong looked even younger than him, and he was actually scolding him in front of everyone like an old man. Qin Yunyan was furious and snorted secretly. He cupped his hands to Li Yundong with an ugly expression and sat back in his seat. Wang Jinyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. "Jinrenli, according to the rules of the Taoist Assembly, it's time for you to defend the ring. Next, you will be challenged by various sects and clans until you are defeated. But you can rest for a while between each battle. Do you need to rest now?" Zhou Qin, who was not far away, was shocked when she heard this. She couldn't help whispering, "What kind of rule is this? Wasn't this making things difficult for him? Why should I always accept challenges as the champion? What if I run out of strength in the last battle and get defeated?" Zi Yuan smiled helplessly and said, "Will battles are the characteristics of the Taoist Assembly. If you weren't strong enough to suppress all the heroes, you wouldn't have been able to take away the prize magic treasure." Zhou Qin was stunned and whispered, "It's too cruel and unfair." Su Chan comforted Zhou Qin in a low voice, "Sister Zhou Qin, don't worry. Yundong will definitely be fine. He's very powerful now." The girls whispered to each other in private, but Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't answer Wang Jinyuan's words. Instead, he cupped his hands to the cultivators of the various sects and said, "Which fellow Taoist would like to come and teach me?" At this time, the cultivators of the various sects were all shocked and frightened by Li Yundong's magical skills just now. For a moment, no one took the initiative to fight. All of them were hoping that others would take the lead so that they could take advantage of the situation. Wang Jinyuan saw that everyone was silent and no one was going to fight. He frowned secretly and said in a clear voice, "According to the rules, if no one fights within the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Jinrenli will automatically win." When the crowd heard this, there was a sudden commotion. No one was willing to let Li Yundong take away the immortal pen just like that, but they were even more unwilling to go out first to consume Li Yundong's jinqi and then let the latecomers take advantage of it. For a moment, everyone just looked at each other and encouraged each other to step forward. They tried their best to carry forward the spirit of internationalism. Wang Jinyuan saw that the people of the various sects were so scared by Li Yundong that they didn't dare to step forward. He frowned and quickly glanced at Sun Beitian, who was not far away. When Sun Beitian saw that Wang Jinyuan's gaze had swept over him, he immediately understood. He slowly walked to the front of the stage and said in a clear voice, "Jinren, your thunder-controlling skills are very powerful, but I wonder how good you are at the five-element Shintong?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Not bad." Sun Beitian laughed and said, "That's good. I only know a little bit of the five elements Kung Fu. Come on, Jinren, let's fight with the five elements Kung Fu." When the cultivators of the various sects saw that Sun Beitian had taken the initiative to step forward to fight, they all secretly breathed a sigh of relief and became faintly excited. Li Yundong's thunder-controlling skills just now were really powerful and frightening. However, no matter how powerful a person was, it was impossible for him to be proficient in all kinds of magic. They didn't know how good Li Yundong's five elements Shintong was. Sun Beitian was an old senior of the Gazao sect. He had been a famous great cultivator 20 years ago, and he was best at fighting with the five elements. Li Yundong's thunder-controlling skills were so abnormal. There was no reason for the five elements to be so abnormal, right? Chapter 481. Go to WatchNet. Li Yundong looked at Sun Beitian, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, "I wonder how Jinren's son wants to fight the five elements." Sun Beitian chuckled. He walked to the table, knocked on it, and said, "Jinren, why don't we use this table as the arena? The two of us will show our magical powers and see who has more mysterious changes. Whoever wins will win. What do you think?" Li Yundong was very curious and asked, "How do you do it on this table?" Sun Beitian took out 5 bags from his clothes. Each bag was about the size of a fist. Sun Beitian poured the 5 bags on the table. Everyone looked at them and saw that the 5 bags were filled with soil. However, the color of the soil in each bag was different. They were green, white, red, black, and yellow. WatchNet. 7KOM. Sun Beitian put the 5 piles of soil on the table and wiped them with his hands. The 5 piles of soil of different colors were mixed together, forming a circular 8 trigrams pattern. Zhou Qin was curious and asked Ziyuan in confusion, "Ziyuan, what are you doing?" Ziyuan said with a serious face, "I don't know either, but the 5 bags that Sun Beitian took out should contain soil from the east, west, south, north, and center. I just don't know what he's going to do by taking out the soil and arranging it into such an 8 diagrams pattern." After Sun Beitian arranged the 8 trigrams pattern, half of it was facing himself and the other half was facing Li Yundong. He said, "Jinren, this 8 trigrams pattern is like a battlefield between 2 sides. The yin-yang line in the middle is the battle line between our 2 sides. Why don't we use our respective divine abilities and use this 8 trigrams as a battlefield to attack each other? Whoever completely pushes the battle to the other's yin and yang points first will lose. How about it?" Li Yundong looked down and saw 2 extremely conspicuous yin and yang dots on both sides of the yin-yang 8 diagrams, one black and one white. They were like 2 castles standing in the middle, staring at each other like tigers. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Jinren Sun's method is really interesting. Well, let's do as you say." As soon as Li Yundong agreed, Sun Beitian immediately burst out laughing. "Good. Straightforward." The cultivators in the cabin also began to whisper to each other and discuss, "What kind of fight is this? Why haven't I heard of it before?" "That's right. How are they going to fight?" Li Yundong is too bold. He dared to agree without knowing the rules. "Haven't you heard of the saying, 'The skilled are bold'? Bulsh *t. How old is he? Even if he started cultivating in his mother's womb, it's impossible for him to be proficient in both thunder spells and all 5 element spells." When Su Chan and Zhou Qin saw that everyone was talking about it, they couldn't help but feel anxious for Li Yundong. Wan Hongling looked at the field. She gently pulled Ziyuan's sleeve and whispered, "Sister Ziyuan, do you see anything? What was the meaning of this battle of magical powers? Why don't I get it?" Ziyuan frowned slightly. She stared at the field without blinking, as if she was thinking about something. When she heard Wan Hongling's words, she said without looking back, Although I don't know how Sun Baitian is going to fight now, the 5 elements battle can't escape the principle of mutual enhancement and restraint. Sun Baitian used the 5-colored soil of the east, south, west, and middle as his city and territory. The soil itself has different attributes of the 5 directions. Ruan Hongling's eyes lit up, and she said in a low voice, "Yes, the corresponding color of the east is cyan, which belongs to wood. The corresponding color of the west is white, which belongs to gold. The corresponding color of the south is red, which belongs to fire. The corresponding color of the north is black, which belongs to water. The corresponding color of the center is yellow, which belongs to earth." This soil is originally an earth element, but it is mixed with the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth, which greatly increases the difficulty of mutual enhancement and restraint of the 5 elements. Ziyuan nodded slightly. Just as she was about to speak, Sun Baitian suddenly cupped his hands to everyone and said, "Everyone, I invite you to watch a good show." After that, he waved his hand and gathered some of the soil in the 8 diagrams pattern in front of him into his palm. With his other hand, he quickly took out a talisman from his bosom and stuffed it into his palm. Then he quickly blew on it. When Sun Baitian opened his hand again, as soon as the soil particles in his palm fell into the 8 diagrams pattern on the round table, they immediately turned into clay figurines the size of a fingernail. These clay figurines had heads, faces, arms, and legs, as if they were living little people. When everyone saw this, they were suddenly shocked. Some cultivators suddenly stood up and said in surprise, "This is throwing soil to make soldiers." Zhou Qin was also taken aback and said, "What kind of magic is this? I've only heard of soldiers made from beans, but this is the first time I've heard of someone who can make soldiers out of soil." Ziyuan frowned and quickly explained, "This is a talisman magic. Just now, Sun Baitian must have used an earth summoning magic. This kind of talisman must gather the spiritual qi of heaven and earth in it every day, so that it naturally has a spiritual nature. After a long time, it will catalyze everything it can come into contact with. Even soil can become little people." Zhou Qin was shocked and said, "Such a magical magic? Can it turn into something else?" Ziyuan's eyes were fixed on the field. She said, "It's not impossible, but human beings are the most intelligent of all living things. If they want to change, they will naturally change the most intelligent things. Who would change something of a lower level?" While the 2 of them were talking in low voices, Sun Baitian suddenly waved his hand again and summoned a mahogany stool from the side. Sun Baitian held the stool with both hands and exerted his strength. In an instant, the hard mahogany stool was crushed into countless small sawdust as if it were tofu. Sun Baitian grabbed a handful of sawdust with one hand and muttered something in a low voice for a while. Then, with a wave of his hand, the sawdust in his hand turned into small pieces of wood of various shapes. But when everyone took a closer look, they saw that these small pieces of wood turned out to be ladders, chariots, catapults, and other siege weapons. Everyone instantly turned pale with fright, and all of them gasped in shock. To control these small sawdust into such small and sophisticated siege weapons with one's own magical power, what kind of terrifying would control magic was this? But before everyone had time to exclaim, Sun Baitian laughed and waved his hand again. A bronze incense burner on the table next to him flew into his hand. He held the bronze incense burner with both hands, only to see that it seemed to be made of water. It deformed little by little, and after a while, it was kneaded into a ball of mud by him. Everyone in the cabin couldn't help but be shocked and exclaim, "Turning iron into mud." Zhou Qin had seen Chen Yunyan use the power of his Naiden to compress a head-sized water ball into a thumb-sized ball. She had thought that this was an extremely terrifying kung fu and ability, but she hadn't expected that Sun Baitian would be able to knead a bronze cauldron into a ball of mud, as if he was kneading dough. Isn't this too terrifying? For a moment, everyone from the Fox Zen school was so shocked that they couldn't speak. Su Chan widened her eyes and looked at Sun Baitian with a face full of fear. She said in a trembling voice, "What kind of cultivation is this? It's too scary, isn't it?" Ziyuan said with an ugly expression, Sun Baitian is indeed a senior of the Gazao sect. He is also worthy of being a great cultivator who was famous in the world 20 years ago. In the past 20 years, he has disappeared without a trace. I didn't expect his cultivation to have advanced to such a level. Wan Hongling also said with a face full of fear, Shiji Ziyuan, do you think he's hiding something in his palm? Otherwise, how could he knead bronze into mud with such great strength? Ziyuan's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes lit up and she said, yes, as long as there is a fire magic hidden in the palm of his hand, and fire can subdue metal. When the temperature is high, the hard metal will naturally become soft. When everyone heard this, they felt a lot more at ease and said one after another, that must be it. Su Chan patted her chest and said with a frightened face, I was scared to death. I thought that this person was so strong that he could knead hard bronze like it was made of mud. Ziyuan shook her head and said, even if that's not the case, we can't underestimate Sun Baitian's ability. Think about it, to be able to hide a fire spell in the palm of one's hand without leaving a single trace, this in itself requires an extremely strong control over the power of fire, and one must also control this power so that it doesn't hurt oneself, especially when the bronze reaches the melting point. Not only will one not be burned when holding an object, one can also move it freely. What kind of amazing ability is this? When everyone heard this, they couldn't help but frown and look at Li Yundong worriedly. At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help but look slightly surprised. He watched as Sun Baitian kept digging a little bit from the iron mud and then throwing it on the table. As soon as the iron mud fell on the table, it turned into weapons one after another. There were knives, spears, swords, halberds, axes, knives, forks, and everything. These little clay men quickly picked up a weapon and then lined up neatly. Every step they took made a neat roar on the table, like a real army marching, giving people a sense of pressure that could not be underestimated. Especially when they walked to the dividing line of the yin-yang pattern, a clay man at the head walked out. As soon as this clay man raised his hand, the clay soldiers behind him suddenly stopped with a rumble. They were as neat as a lion that had been through hundreds of battles. The clay man at the head raised his long sword, and then the clay soldiers behind him immediately raised their weapons with a clatter. The table seemed to have grown into a forest of steel. Although the cultivators in the yacht felt that there was a distance between them, they still felt a cold, murderous aura coming at them. They were all stunned, as if an army had suddenly appeared on the table and was about to attack the city in the next second. At this time, the yacht was so quiet that even the drop of a needle could be heard. Sun Baitian looked at Li Yundong proudly and said, Generally, let's get started, shall we? As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the clay man at the head of the 8 diagrams on the round table suddenly slash the long sword in his hand forward. These densely packed clay men let out a loud roar and aggressively broke through the dividing line of the yin-yang 8 diagrams, rushing toward Li Yundong's stronghold. For a moment, everyone felt that the round table was a battlefield, and the clay men were warriors bathed in blood. They were like fierce beasts, roaring and pouncing forward. They were murderous, unstoppable, and invincible. Ziyuan was shocked by the amazing momentum of these little clay men. She had never seen such a fight, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Ziyuan widened her eyes and said, What should we do? How should we deal with it? Vote for recommendation previous page, return a table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Homes in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 482. Go to WatchNet. Although Li Yundong had stayed in the 3,000 small worlds of the Burning Thumb Pot for many years, had read almost all the classics of Buddhism and Taoism, and had learned almost all the magic, he had rarely used these magic in actual combat, especially in an incredible fight like the one in front of him. In the face of the swarming clay soldiers, Li Yundong was shocked and quickly began to cast magic. Go to watch net. 7KOM. Li Yundong pointed his finger at the table, and soon the mud particles on the yin and yang boundary kept jumping. Each grain of mud was constantly expanding, and soon a high wall was formed, blocking the way of these clay soldiers. However, these clay soldiers were not discouraged at all when they hit the hard wall. They quickly separated into a line, and the clay soldiers behind them pushed the siege vehicles made by Sun Baitian's magic up one by one. These clay soldiers were either in groups of 30 or 50, surrounding a mud chariot, or more than a dozen people carrying ladders one after another, pouncing on the wall like ants. Li Yundong saw that although these clay soldiers were blocked by the wall for a while, they controlled the siege weapons and kept attacking the wall fiercely. Every time the chariot hit the wall, there would be a low rumble, and the wall would also emit a faint yellow light. Li Yundong looked at the table with a frown. He knew that this wall alone could not stop these clay soldiers from moving forward. It was already on the verge of collapse under the fierce impact of the siege vehicles controlled by the clay soldiers. In particular, some small clay men climbing the ladders had already climbed up the wall and began to jump down like dumplings. Li Yundong saw that more and more clay soldiers had climbed over the wall, and more cracks had gradually appeared in the wall he had built. His brows furrowed tighter and tighter. Seeing that these clay soldiers were about to rush to his stronghold, he suddenly had the urge to slap them into mud pancakes. Sun Baitian, who was opposite Li Yundong, seemed to have noticed Li Yundong's thoughts. He chuckled and said, "Jinren, we can't fight directly. We can only use magic to fight with the 5 elements. Otherwise, it will be considered cheating, and we will lose." Li Yundong quickly raised his eyes to look at Sun Baitian. He smiled slightly and lowered his eyes again. His mind was racing as he tried to think of a solution. Li Yundong thought to himself, this clay figurine is originally an earth magic and wood restrains earth, so should I use wood magic to deal with it? Thinking of this, Li Yundong quickly mobilized his liver qi. The liver was of the wood attribute. As soon as he mobilized his liver qi, his face turned a little green. He pointed his finger at the table, and countless tiny vines quickly grew on the table, binding the little clay figures in place one by one. At this time, the people who were watching the battle had already left their original positions and gathered around the round table, watching this eye-opening battle attentively. Su Chan and the others clenched their fists anxiously and looked up at the table. They wished they could rush up and help. Seeing that Li Yundong had used wood magic to trap the clay soldiers in place, they couldn't help cheering in unison. But as soon as they shouted, they saw the clay soldiers quickly waving the weapons in their hands and looking at the wooden vines entangling their bodies. In just 2 or 3 moves, they had cut the wooden vines clean and then rushed forward quickly. Li Yundong was slightly shocked. He hadn't expected that the weapons in the hands of these clay figurines would have such a magical effect. While he was stunned, he saw that the clay soldiers had already rushed to his stronghold. Seeing that he was about to lose, Li Yundong suddenly heard Zi Yuan's voice transmission saying, "Li Yundong, blindly restraining the 5 elements is not enough." Sun Baitian originally used the earth of the 5 directions. Although these clay soldiers themselves are of the earth attribute is mixed with the other 5 elements. Moreover, the weapons in the clay soldiers' hands are of the gold attribute. Gold restrains wood, so it naturally restrains your wood magic. You have to find a way to deal with these clay soldiers with the help of the 5 elements. Otherwise, you can't deal with them with just one magic. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He first quickly mobilized the earth magic and built a thick and tall earth wall around his stronghold. Although this earth wall was only as high as his forearm, it was already an insurmountable wall for these clay soldiers the size of a fingernail. After blocking the attack of the clay soldiers, Li Yundong temporarily took a breath and began to carefully think about what Zi Yuan had said before. He thought to himself, Zi Yuan is right. In theory, Sun Baitian is attacking me with 3 kinds of magic: earth, gold, and wood. How can I resist him with only earth and wood? I have to mix the 5 kinds of magic together. Li Yundong saw that after these clay soldiers met the wall he had built with earth magic, they were ready to use the same trick again. They used siege weapons and ladders, trying to break through the wall at the same time. Li Yundong saw that the wall was shaking again and again under the fierce attack of the siege vehicles. He thought to himself, is there any way to make this wall impenetrable? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suddenly had an idea. He thought, among the 5 elements, fire gives birth to earth. If I use fire to urge earth, I think the earth magic will be even more powerful. Li Yundong's mind was working fast. He rubbed his fingers together, and a burning fireball appeared on his fingertips. Most of the cultivators around him were discerning. As soon as they saw Li Yundong's movements, they had already guessed what he was going to do. Immediately, a cultivator nodded secretly and said in a low voice, "Yes, using fire to urge earth can make your own city wall more stable. Moreover, fire can restrain gold, and it can also restrain the gold weapons in the hands of the clay men." But there were also cultivators who sneered and said, "Don't be silly. Sun Baitian's clay men are also of the earth element. Once you use fire, they will also become stronger." Su Chan saw that the area of Li Yundong's territory on the round table had been reduced to a very small area. Sun Baitian's army had already arrived at the city and surrounded the stronghold. The little girl couldn't help but feel anxious, but she couldn't do anything to help. She could only stare at the small war on the round table like the others. Seeing that Li Yundong was going to use fire magic to deal with him, Sun Baitian smiled and waved his hands, summoning a water ball on the teacup next to him. As soon as Li Yundong released the fire magic, he would use water magic to restrain Li Yundong's magic. Seeing Sun Baitian's movements, Li Yundong smiled slightly and waved his other hand in the air, summoning all the tea in the teacup in front of him into his palm. He held a fireball in one hand and a water ball in the other. There was a thoughtful and focused expression on his face. Obviously, this battle was no longer simply about who had stronger spiritual power and who was more proficient in the 5 elements of magic. It was more about wisdom and strategy. Everyone saw that Li Yundong could control both water and fire magic freely. Before they had time to marvel in their hearts, they saw Li Yundong suddenly throw the water ball in his hand onto the table. With a crash, the table seemed to have turned into a swamp, and all the clay soldiers were soaked in the water. Sun Baitian frowned and threw the water ball in his hand into the air. At the same time, he quickly summoned a ball of fire with one hand and quickly took out a talisman with the word Earth written on it with the other. He threw the fireball and the talisman at the clay men on the table at the same time. The clay men were strengthened by the earth magic and stimulated by the fire magic. Suddenly, their bodies grew larger, from the size of a pinky nail to the size of a thumb. These clay figurines were originally covered in water above their heads. Now, they could only reach their waists in the water. With a shout, they quickly dug up the soil on the table with the weapons in their hands. In just a short while, they dug out one river after another, and the water on the table flowed obediently down the river. The surrounding cultivators nodded one after another and said, "Li Yundong clearly knows that earth restrains water, but he still used water to wash it. Isn't he asking for trouble?" But as soon as they finished speaking, they saw Li Yundong quickly throw the fireball in his hand at the mud wall. The mud wall suddenly burst into a blazing flame with a bang. In the burning flame, the mud wall seemed to have a life of its own and kept growing taller and taller. It had grown from the height of a forearm to the height of an arm and the thickness of a palm. For an adult, this was just a mud castle, like a child's house, but for a clay man the size of a thumb, it was already an almost indestructible super fortress. Only then did everyone understand that Li Yundong had deliberately used water to attack the other side in order to attract Sun Baitian's attention. At the same time, he had used fire to make the wall taller and thicker. This was a tactic of diversion. Sun Baitian frowned secretly. He quickly glanced at Li Yundong, snorted, and said, "Jinren Li, you can use fire, but I can't." After saying that, he rubbed his hands together and the palms of his hands were ignited with blazing flames. With a wave of his hand, he threw the flames in his hands toward the dense clay soldiers on the table. But as soon as he moved, Li Yunyang quickly chuckled. He raised his hand, and the tea in the teacup in the cabin of the cruise ship automatically jumped up. Like a high-pressure water column, it rushed toward the flame thrown by Sun Baitian and scattered it in an instant. Sun Baitian frowned. He was unwilling to give up and mobilized with magic again. Once again, he created a siege weapon several times larger than before and launched an attack on Li Yundong's stronghold. Li Yundong also reacted accordingly. He mobilized gold magic and imitated Sun Baitian's method of kneading a bronze incense burner into iron mud. Then, he threw the iron mud around his stronghold. As soon as the iron mud fell on the table, it immediately turned into a strict iron wall, as if the stronghold was covered with a layer of hard armor. Without saying a word, Sun Baitian immediately mobilized fire magic again and burned it toward the hard metal armor outside Li Yundong's stronghold. Li Yundong also immediately called water to extinguish the fire. But this time, before Sun Baitian's fire met the water, he suddenly controlled all the clay men on the table to throw all the wood siege weapons into the fire. This time, wood gave birth to fire, and the flames became extremely strong. Although water could restrain fire, because the water was too weak, Li Yundong couldn't resist it for a while, and the flames burned the metal wall. As soon as the metal wall was burned by the fire, it immediately turned red, and there were signs of softening and collapsing. Seeing the opportunity, Li Yundong immediately removed the iron wall and led the fire to his stronghold. As soon as his stronghold was burned by the fire gave birth to earth, which once again helped Li Yundong's stronghold, making it taller and stronger. At this time, the people in the cabin saw Li Yundong and Sun Baitian fighting back and forth, dealing with each other's moves. Their speed was so fast that it was dizzying. In particular, the round table was like a battlefield. It was really like a small battle, making some cultivators who didn't have time to think only feel like they were watching a magic movie. It was as if they were there, watching to their heart's content and cheering. As the saying goes, the layman watches the fun, while the expert watches the artistry. Some cultivators only felt that the battle was very lively, but they couldn't keep up with the changes of the two people to think. Some cultivators could faintly see that Li Yundong and Sun Baitian were racking their brains to use the 5 elements magic to constantly attack and defend. In particular, the two of them used the 5 elements magic without thinking, not only showing their superb control skills of the 5 elements, but also their superior reaction and wisdom. Especially in the face of Sun Baitian's aggressive attack, Li Yundong, who was at an absolute disadvantage at the beginning, slowly gained a foothold. Although he was facing a bad situation where the army was pressing on, he calmly dealt with it and thwarted Sun Baitian's attacks one after another. Not only did he stabilize his position, but he was also temporarily invincible. The cultivators in the field saw this and secretly admired him. They couldn't help thinking, if I were Li Yundong, would I be able to block Sun Baitian's attack, which was like a raging tide. Chapter 483. Go to Watch Network. Although Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school looked down on the Gazao sect and secretly regarded Li Yundong as a thorn in her side, she couldn't help but sigh to Zhou Ping when she saw this scene. During the Warring States period, the king of Chu summoned Liu Ban and built a large number of siege weapons to attack the Song dynasty. When Moz heard the news, he traveled thousands of miles to the Chu kingdom and launched a siege battle with Liu Ban. In that battle, Moz used his belt as a city wall and launched an offensive and defensive demonstration against Liu Ban. As a result, Liu Ban changed the siege technique 9 times, but Moz easily resolved it. I didn't expect that after more than 2,000 years, this offensive and defensive battle would reappear in such a form in front of us today. What an anomaly! Zhou Ping looked at Li Yundong with an extremely complicated gaze. She said indignantly in her heart, "Master, How could Li Yundong have cultivated for such a short period of time? How could he use so many magic arts? His thunder magic is so powerful, but why is he so proficient in the 5 elements magic? Zhongling also looked at Li Yundong and shook her head slightly. She said in a low voice, "This boy must have had some kind of adventure again. Otherwise, it would be impossible for his magic cultivation to improve so quickly in such a short period of time." Zhou Ping glanced worriedly at Zhang Tianhe, who was standing next to her with a serious face. She whispered to Zhongling, "Master, then shitty." Although Zhongling didn't like Li Yundong very much, she was also a rare great cultivator in the cultivation world, so she naturally knew what was good and what was bad. It was impossible for her to forcibly describe a short person as tall and a tall person as short in front of her disciple. Zhongling frowned slightly and shook her head at Zhou Ping, motioning for her to stop talking. Zhou Ping immediately shut her mouth. She knew that even her master was not optimistic about Zhang Tianhe's ability to compete with Li Yundong. Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and said, "Shitty has been working hard to cultivate since he was humiliated and returned to the mountain last time. This time, his cultivation has improved greatly. He wanted to avenge his previous humiliation, but he didn't expect Li Yundong to improve even faster. I really don't know how sad he should be." Zhou Ping looked at Zhang Tianhe worriedly, but Zhang Tianhe stared at the field as if he didn't feel anything. His body trembled slightly, and he unconsciously clenched his fists. Although his face was expressionless, his eyes revealed strong jealousy and unwillingness. Just as the people outside were engrossed in this rare and wonderful battle, a small sparrow suddenly landed on the skylight of the yacht. This small sparrow stuck its head out and looked inside the skylight. After a while, a paper crane landed next to this sparrow. The paper crane and the sparrow stared at each other for a while, then turned their heads in unison and continued to look into the cabin. At this time, the battle in the cabin had become white-hot. Li Yundong began to change from defense to offense. He was becoming more and more proficient in the control of the 5 elements, and his understanding of the mutual promotion and restraint of the 5 elements was becoming deeper and deeper. At this time, the round table was no longer the scene of a dense group of clay soldiers attacking the city. Li Yundong's stronghold had become an impregnable stronghold. Under Sun Baitian's fierce attack, not only was the stronghold not weakened, but it had also become stronger and taller because of Li Yundong's ingenious use of force. However, Li Yundong's stronghold had become taller and larger, and Sun Baitian had no choice but to upgrade his clay soldiers and weapons. The clay soldiers, which had been the size of a fingernail, had gradually become the size of a baby's fist. The cultivators watching even had an illusion that if the two of them continued to fight like this, sooner or later, the stronghold in front of Li Yundong would become a real ultimate stronghold, and sooner or later, Sun Baitian's clay soldiers would also become human-sized clay soldiers. While Sun Baitian was attacking the stronghold, Li Yundong also began to build his own army and began to attack Sun Baitian's stronghold. Everyone saw that Li Yundong was mobilizing his Jinqi to fight against Sun Baitian with all his might. For a moment, the clay soldiers on the table were fighting each other. On top of them, the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth were flying everywhere. One moment, Li Yundong had gained the upper hand in one battlefield, and the next moment, Sun Baitian had turned the tables on another battlefield. The two of them seemed to be fighting on a sand table battlefield. At this time, Li Yundong's Jinqi had reached its peak state. Although his face looked normal, white steam was rising from the top of his head. Sun Baitian's face changed from red to green, and the colors changed back and forth, like a chameleon. Sun Baitian saw that Li Yundong's stronghold was becoming stronger and stronger, while his own side had been attacking for a long time. His Jinqi was already a little weak, but his opponent, Li Yundong, was still full of divine light. His eyes were bright and unfathomable, as if he still had a lot of strength left. Sun Baitian was secretly shocked and thought to himself, "I've cultivated for decades, but I've never seen anyone with such a powerful and long aura. What's more, this person is so young. How did he cultivate?" What's more, he is the leader of the Fox Sen school. I heard that this person has a bad reputation and is a lustful person. But how could a lustful person have such a powerful and majestic aura? Sun Baitian was secretly shocked. He gritted his teeth and tried his best to hold on, but the momentum of the previous fierce attack was too strong and had consumed a lot of Jinqi. At this time, Li Yundong commanded his army to attack. It was really like a fierce beast coming out of its cage, like a flood opening the floodgates. In an instant, the battle line rushed back to the boundary between Yin and Yang, and his clay soldiers were beaten back again and again. At this time, the sharp-eyed cultivators knew that Sun Baitian was already an arrow at the end of its flight and could no longer hold on under Li Yundong's tide-like attacks. They shook their heads and sighed to themselves. It's a pity that Sun Baitian lost like this. I don't know who this Li Yundong is. Even his 5 elements magic is so powerful that he can defeat Sun Baitian, who came prepared. Terrible. It's really terrible. But just as they were sighing, Li Yundong's troops and Sun Baitian's troops were fighting and colliding in the middle of the round table. Suddenly, the round table could not bear the heavy burden. With a crack, it broke into 2 pieces and fell in each of the 2 men's directions. Li Yundong and Sun Baitian were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other and did not speak for a while. Li Yundong looked at Sun Baitian, as if asking him if he wanted to continue. However, Sun Baitian seemed to not see Li Yundong's gaze. He just glanced at him and quickly withdrew his gaze, trying to adjust his breathing. Everyone saw that Sun Baitian was sweating profusely at this time, as if he had just been fished out of a water tank. Although Li Yundong was a little out of breath, his face was very normal, and there was not a drop of sweat on his body. When the 2 of them compared, it was obvious who was superior. Wan Yuan frowned secretly when he saw the result of the battle. Soon, he had an idea and burst into laughter and applauded. Wonderful! It's really wonderful. At this time, the crowd on the scene seemed to have woken up from a dream, and they burst into cheers and applause. Although this battle of magical powers was not as earth-shattering as the previous one, this battle of magical powers not only compared the 2's cultivation and understanding of the 5 elements, but also compared the 2's strategies and intelligence. This battle of magical powers was not only a live battle of offense and defense, but it was also the perfect application of military strategy in a battle of magical powers. Everyone couldn't help but be convinced by this. Just as the crowd was cheering deafeningly, the sparrow, who had been watching the scene from the skylight, suddenly spread its wings and flew up. It flapped its wings and flew into the sky. After flying in one direction for a while, it finally landed in the palm of an old man. This old man was wearing a black kimono and a pair of wooden clogs. He was Master Xinyan of the Regoino Jinyan Tantrism in Japan, whom Li Yundong had met once in Shiyuan Temple. The old man gently stroked the sparrow in the palm of his hand with his wrinkled hand. He sighed softly and said, "Alas, I didn't expect that China, which claims to be the Great China and the Heavenly Kingdom, would degenerate to such an extent. So many cultivators had actually been reduced to acrobatics. Sad, lamentable." Standing next to him was Xinxiu, who had confronted Li Yundong before. The young monk was still wearing a famous brand suit and standing humbly behind a little girl. After hearing Master Xinyan's words, he said, "Master Xinyan, you worry too much. These cultivators have to fight secretly. How can they have any real ability?" Tachibana Wakako, who was wearing a red kimono with white flowers, looked like a cute doll. She looked up at Xinyan and said with a smile, "But Master Xinyan, I think their battle just now was very interesting." Xinyan shook his head and sighed. "Tachibana Wakako, after all, you're still a child, so you'll find it interesting. In my opinion, what happened just now was simply a farce. In our Japanese cultivation world, this is simply incredible. A battle is a battle. This is a sacred and solemn matter. How can it be treated as a joke? In our cultivation world, A battle is a battle. If you don't win, you will die. Tachibana Wakako blinked her eyes as if she understood and asked naively, Master Xinyan, do we still want to go to their Taoist assembly? Xinyan thought for a moment and hesitated. While he was hesitating, he heard Shinsi say, Master Xinyan, please allow me to go to the Taoist assembly and fight with Li Yundong. It will also let these Chinese cultivators know what a real battle is. Xinyan shook his head without thinking and said, No, we're not here to cause trouble this time. Shinsu was greatly disappointed, but he didn't say anything more. He lowered his head obediently and stood respectfully behind Tachibana Wakako like a servant, not saying another word. However, Tachibana Wakako was a little unwilling. She pulled on Xinyan's sleeve and kept begging, Master Xinyan, it's not easy for me to come out, and I happen to run into such a fun Taoist assembly. Let me go and have a look. I beg you, I beg you. Xinyan looked at Tachibana Wakako lovingly. He thought about it carefully and smiled helplessly. Well, Tachibana Wakako, I really can't do anything to you. When Tachibana Wakako heard this, she was overjoyed and cheered. Hooray! Master Xinyan is the best. Don't worry, I will be very obedient and won't cause any trouble. Hearing this, Xinyan put his hands in his sleeves and said proudly, So what if you cause trouble? How can these cultivators, who treat fighting as children's games, be worthy of being our opponents? After that, he burst out laughing. His laughter was like thunder, startling the little sparrow in his hand and causing it to fly away into the distance. I'm sorry, but because I don't have any manuscripts, the update time has become very unstable. I hope you can understand. In addition, there's no need to join groups 1 to 13. They're all full. If you want to join, please join group 14, 143153640. I can't guarantee when group 14 will be full. If you want to join, hurry up, you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.